Hello everyone! Welcome to the first Tomlinson Talks of 2026. I'm just going to allow YouTube to refresh and ensure that we are in fact live, because otherwise you will have all joined for nothing. Yes, excellent! I hope you're all doing well. I've got the chat up. So I had planned to do a stream earlier this week on the great feminization and the conquest of the Longhouse in all of our institutions. I found some interesting stuff. And then, for personal reasons, I didn't stream on Monday. But thank you for all of those who watched the pre-recorded video. It's done very well. And then, on Monday, of course, Nadim Zahawi defected to Reform UK. And so I thought, it's probably worth talking about the then wave of local council defections into Reform and the implications for what kind of party this will build. And so I was creating the script yesterday and thought that this was going to be a conversation as to whether or not Reform had become a Tory refugee camp, how that might hamper their ability to govern, go over Curtis Yarvin's recent Substack and draw parallels between the loss of Rubicon energy in America and what's happening in the UK, whether or not a hard party can succeed. And then this morning, Kemi Badenoch woke up and decided that Robert Jenrick had sufficiently pissed in her cornflakes to force her to commit political seppuku. I'm not sure what the translation is into Igbo there. And she just defenestrated him on a Zoom call, by the looks of it, with a blurred background and a scuffed mic, a bit like a HR lady telling you that your joke in the company Slack channel was too offensive and you need to be let go without fulfilling your contract. And the optics of that were so disastrous that I could tell by the afternoon that not only was Jenrick going to defect to Reform, but this was going to be the death of the Conservative Party, and hey presto, Robert Jenrick becomes the 6th, if Reform had played their cards right, it would have been 8th, but nevertheless, 6th Reform MP. And this is such a victory for Nigel Farage, because now the inevitability that Jenrick was either going to lead the Conservatives into a post-election coalition with Reform or himself defect, and they have to reconcile all of the attacks that they've made against one another, which we'll go through. I've got a lot of links, let's hope my desktop doesn't crash. But the fact that they were going to have to reconcile that and walk back all of the hurtful comments they made about one another was overshadowed by the fact that Kemi Badenoch bungled this so badly with the presentation, with the delivery, with the clear demonstration that she has the uncanny ability, Kemi kind of lately, to snatch a loss from the jaws of victory. That all the contradictions of Jenrick joining Reform just doesn't matter. And actually, it's encouraging because Jenrick clearly chases mainstream approval. Because there was a Spectator leak around the time of the Conservative leadership election which said that he intended to have the policies of Nigel Farage with the delivery of David Cameron in order to retire Farage and provide a sufficient challenge to Reform from Reform's right. And this is why he was listening to some pretty staunch advisors behind the scenes, which I've spoken to. He had a very strong team, and this is why he was coming out and talking about English identity and mass deportations and revoking indefinite leave to remain for the Boris wave well before Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef were. So he's positioning himself to Reform's right. Now he's been assimilated into Reform, and his defection speech was a barnstormer, and it was filled with all sorts of revelations about the inner workings of the Conservative Party that we all intuited but didn't have confirmed before. For example, the fact that they were proposing fake policies that they all laughed about knowing weren't going to work, but just to try to contain public outrage while continuing the mass inflow of cheap labour to not just replace the native population, but to drive down the cost of said labour, to increase house prices, to appease their house building donors, because I think it's like a quarter of Conservative Party donors prior to the last election were property developers. So they were demographically gerrymandering the country to the benefits of special interests, and Jenrick, to his credit, resigned from the Home Office when he realised the Rwanda scheme wasn't going to work, and now has stepped down from the Conservative Party, and it was in the works for a while. It wasn't quite how he planned to do it. But the fact that Kemi stepped on this avoidable rake shows you that the Conservative Party, as he said, is unrecoverable. They don't get it, they never will get it, they will never be salvaged, and now it allows us to recognise that all efforts should be focused on forcing Reform to be better, because this has effectively blocked a Conservative Reform merger, which a lot of money power was going into making sure happened, by the way, to then soften Reform, to be the kind of policy nexus for a Reform that got complacent about formulating its own policy and was inexperienced in government. And it has made it so that there is a force that is susceptible to social pressure that isn't just coming from the BBC, ITV, and Sky within Reform that hardens its rhetoric and then is kind of forced to make good on that, especially by some of the radical Zoomers that Jenrick has surrounded himself with. Now, we will be spending this show discussing the recent council defections, Nadim Zahawi's membership, the sort of faction wars going on in Reform, because this has long-term policy and international relations implications that I haven't seen anyone else cover yet, so we're going to go through that. And I'm going to explain a little bit what's going on behind the scenes at Reform, because even though I am banned from the party, just as I am from the Conservatives, I still speak to people that have either been sacked by Reform because of hope not hate hit pieces. That's still going on, by the way. It just hasn't been publicised. There was one recently, so they're still operating by the hope not hate playbook. But also I still speak to people in the Reform camp, some quite senior, who haven't been forced to denounce me as the Antichrist, despite what Unheard and the like have attempted to do, and try and provide a bit of thinking on what's going on behind the scenes, because Reform is not a united front. There are factions vying for power, and it's a bit like the siblings squabbling under King Lear at this point, trying to promote their heir apparent to replace Nigel. And this is one thing I will say up front. No matter whether or not we trust Jenrick, and look, I know some people who vouch for him, but he's had an inconsistent political record, let's be clear. No matter whether or not any of you trust Jenrick's defection to Reform UK makes the plan to install Zia Yusuf as the first Muslim Prime Minister and coronate him as Farage's successor much less likely. And that is a real positive, not just because I'm principally opposed to immigrants and the children of immigrants holding office in our country. I think it's an absurd thing that pretty much no other nation worth its salt does. Not only am I principally opposed to Islam, but I just think he has been unbecoming and dishonest in his treatment of the likes of Rupert Lowe and Sarah Pojan. So anything that distances Zia Yusuf from ascending to the throne is good by me. But anyway, I wanted to frame this by looking at the last week in politics and seeing what Reform's chances have been leading up to these defections. So they've had a bit of a polling dip. So this was Find Out Now's latest poll. This is from today. And they found that Reform are down by 4 points. Now, they have said in a response, this is within the margin of error, 2 to 3 points. So small, week-on-week changes in results can be caused by random sampling or other such things. But they aren't the only poll to register a Reform ceiling of about 30% and a break from the enthusiasm and the fervour that we saw post-2024 general election sustained through 2025. It seems that Reform has lost a little bit of its momentum. People in the Conservatives were coping and calling this a Kemi bounce, but they've only gained by 1 point, and I don't think that's because necessarily of Badenoch's performances at PMQs, even though one of those was quite amusing against Rachel Reeves. This has now been recorded in a pattern across multiple polls. Luke Trill, by the way, is the director of More in Common, and he has come out with a More in Common poll that finds that Reform are down as well from 31%. They're quite bullish on Reform, so you're seeing a sort of cross-board dip. And then Matt Goodwin, obviously he's affiliated with Reform, he's one of their senior spokespeople, he advises on policy, he is an effective media hatchet man who doesn't really have a faction or constituency within the party, and I think has been deliberately distanced from the immediate line of succession, because I respect Matt greatly. He's always been friendly towards me even when we've disagreed, but I think his ambition to become a senior politician in Reform was pretty apparent, and other people who are very ambitious didn't take too kindly to that. But Matt is posting regular polling on Reform, and yes, they might be leading over the Conservatives, but as you've noticed, according to YouGov, that lead has narrowed. They're only on 24%, Conservatives are up to 20%, Labour on 19%, Lib Dems and the Greens can bundle together on that. And if there were to be at the next election, these results, if it came early, and the Lib Dems and the Greens and Labour formed a kind of German firewall, the type that kept the AfD out of all the other parties, then Reform would not be able to form a government, let alone have a majority, unless they ran running to the Conservatives, and I think that merger has been effectively blocked now. So, as the Express have reported on here, this is actually a decline because the party according to YouGov, were around 31% last summer, and now they've dipped down to 24%. So we're seeing a decline in Reform support across multiple polls. We've also seen their leadership, their membership ticker drop by a few hundred in the last couple of weeks. And part of this is because quite a few people have been discontented about the direction of the party, not just their appointment of what I would say is career grifter, Layla Cunningham, who's had every single position under the sun as their London mayoral candidate, but the number of Tory defectors that have jumped ship in recent months. And the fact that they've celebrated every single one of these Tory defectors. I mean, they've just appointed a former Tory lord as their head in Scotland, who was pro-net zero up until 2024, and now is charged with belonging to the anti-net zero party as well as the anti-mass migration party. The ostensible anti-mass migration party. Of course, they need to get better on demographics. But they've had Nadine Dorries, the architect of the Online Safety Act, who keeps saying that Boris Johnson should belong to Reform. They've had Jacob Rees-Mogg making sounds as if he is going to defect, or at least try to broker a Tory and Reform pact. They've had about 20 other high-profile Tories defect. Jonathan Gullis, Marco Longhi, who was like an ex-MP. And they've celebrated all of these as if they are like title contenders coming out on the WWE main stage. They're all getting their entrance music, sprinting in for the Royal Rumble as if they have a chance to throw Big Show over the ropes. And it's just not going down well, because not everyone is... Lots of people will respect the fact that other politicians will bend the knee in deference to the presumptive king of the right who has the mandate of heaven. Like if Nigel Farage looks like all historical forces are swirling around him, and then other politicians fall in line behind him, that's very different to Reform celebrating the unrepentant architects of the Boris wave, who until yesterday were insulting him and his party as racist, coming over in a clear act of opportunism to rehabilitate or salvage their political careers. It's very different to celebrate their arrival into your party as if it's conferring legitimacy on you versus accepting them bending the knee to you. Like, this is what Trump did very well in 2024. He embraced his critics, some of his fiercest critics, like Tulsi Gabbard or J.D. Vance or RFK Jr. And he did so by inviting them onto the stage, and they explained the areas in which their interests authentically aligned with Trump, and they admitted where they got things wrong. They bowed before the king. Whereas Reform is almost looking to their defectors, many of them Boris's cabinet ministers, to tell them that they're okay to win, which is not victorious energy. However, that vibe was disrupted when this morning Kemi Badenoch did the following inexplicable video about 11:05 in the morning, which is early for her. She took a break from doom scrolling, playing Candy Crush, and got up before midday to produce. And look, as I put here, before we even discuss this, before we even play it, can we just discuss the optics of this? Who thought this was a good idea? Bad muffled microphone, fuzzy background, looks like she's giving an interview in the early days of COVID. And she does this because she thought she was going to have House of Cards energy, you know? Why am I blanking on Kevin Spacey's character's name? Frank Underwood. When he comes out and he's meant to give this speech about how we can't reform entitlements, and instead he comes out, goes off script, is honest with the country, and says, you all need to get a job, and your ability to access welfare is conditional on you paying your way. And he bumps up in the polls because people think he's authentic. She clearly was going for a, let's get out ahead of this, let's be authentic, let's be truthful with the public, let's catch Reform and Robert Jenrick off guard, and make it look like I'm the one being decisive and I'm the one setting the frame. But it failed from the outset because you can't set the frame when you just look scuffed. Like, my production value here, and I'm just in my study with a 1080p camera. Look, I've only just upgraded my lighting. My production value here is much better than the leader of the opposition in Parliament. Don't even compare it to Reform's slick media operation. Whoever her advisors were that said, this is fine, put it out the door, should be fired on the spot. But the fact that they won't be is why the Conservative Party are in terminal decline. Anyway, I'll let Olu Kemi speak for herself.
This morning, I removed the Conservative whip from Robert Jenrick after dismissing him from the shadow cabinet. I was very sorry to be presented with clear, irrefutable evidence, not just that he was preparing to defect, but he was planning to do so in the most damaging way possible to the Conservative Party and his shadow cabinet colleagues. It is my responsibility to protect our party, and faced with that information, I took the only decision that any responsible leader could. Because the British public are tired of political psychodrama. So am I. They saw too much of it in the last government, they're seeing too much of it in this government. I will not repeat those mistakes. When I was elected leader, I committed to doing politics differently. Disloyalty and dishonesty undermine trust in politics. They're also disrespectful to our party members, our councillors, MPs, and most of all, voters. You all deserve better. Conservatives suffered a heavy defeat in 2024. That was painful, but we are rebuilding with strong principles, clear plans, and with a serious team united around a shared purpose. When individuals choose to walk away from that effort for personal ambition, that tells you nothing about the Conservative Party and everything you need to know about them. There will be more to say, and I know a lot of commentary about this decision. But I want you all to be in no doubt. It's a time of global uncertainty. I am focused on holding the government to account, ensuring they are acting in the national interest, and that Conservatives deliver a proper plan for a stronger economy, stronger borders, and a stronger Britain.
So a black woman has spoken. Did you listen and learn, chat? I can see you will be very creative in there. By the way, I will read super chats at the end. I'm just going to try and get through a lot of content because my word has a lot happened in the last few days. First of all, people have asked me if I actually read from a script, and I don't. What I do is I pull up a bunch of links that help me structure my thinking. But whenever I'm doing a recorded video, I just speak off the cuff, and I'll make small cuts to make it so that, I already ramble long enough, so I can condense it and make it worth your while. It's clear that Kemi Badenoch is reading from a script here. It's not a particularly slick script. The delivery is dry, and because of the poor aesthetics, it doesn't position her as being strong or decisive. It makes it look like she's desperate and had to react to this morning before a big bombshell dropped. And as someone suggested, it's because she thought that Robert Jenrick was going to announce his defection this afternoon at a pre-planned Reform press conference at about 4:30, and Reform actually were going to present a legal case against the Labour and some Conservative efforts to delay the local elections in May, because the local elections are going to be a bloodbath for both Labour and Conservatives, and as Farage has said, the Conservatives will cease to be a national party. They'll be wiped out across Wales and Scotland and reduced to a rump in the south of England. And this is the reason why Kemi Badenoch actually got out ahead of this and kicked Robert Jenrick out. Because I've spoken to people close to Jenrick before, and in the middle of last year, in summer, they were saying, we have the numbers by November, we just don't want to pull the trigger too early on a leadership contest, because even though we think we could win, number one, James Cleverly is always the contingency plan of the same people that put Kemi Badenoch in as leader, the likes of, Charles Moore and William Hague and Michael Gove, even though Gove has drifted away somewhat from Kemi, he realises that betting the entire house on the Nigerian girl boss wasn't quite the soundest of moves. Anyway, so she has jumped the gun on this because she realises that her death warrant would have been signed by the disastrous performance in the May elections. And so this would trigger yet another leadership contest, and Robert Jenrick, given there would be... people would have drudged up errors from James Cleverly's past, not least of all his tireless campaigning to bring Abdul El Fattah to our country. People would have dredged that up and tanked his chances among the Conservative Party base, what little remains of it, and that Robert Jenrick, even this morning, was polling according to Conservative Home as the most popular member of the shadow cabinet. He, by far and away, sets the tone for what the Conservative Party are focused on, and so he would have walked away with the leadership. And Kemi would have been disgraced and banished to the backbenches. And there is a lot of acrimony between the two of them. There was during the leadership election. Jenrick's wife looked like she was chewing a wasp when Kemi was coronated, and Bob Blackman was saying that it's brilliant to see a black woman lead the oldest political party in the world. Charles Moore said it would be a sight for sore eyes because, of course, the left really couldn't criticize Kemi because they would be such hypocrites for calling her racist. They don't care, you demented old boomer. They're just going to do it anyway. You're just going to cede ground to your enemy. Hey presto, you tank in the polls. Anyway, so there was a lot of no love lost between the two of them. This is why Jenrick was not present on the Conservative Party conference brochures last October when the shadow cabinet were being photographed. This is why Jenrick has largely struck out on his own and succeeded. And therefore, Kemi thought that she was going to be clever by kicking Jenrick out of the party and looking like she could cement her dominion over the Conservatives. I mean, on the plus side, at least Sam Bidwell has now been banished back to Substack and he can go back to mogging the Indian subcontinent. I look forward to him writing more about it. We love Sam on this channel. The problem Kemi has is this strategy was always doomed to fail because YouGov did some polling and they found out that Robert Jenrick is actually more liked among Reform supporters than Conservatives. So you're just giving him over to a faction that wanted him there anyway. So, among those who intended to vote for Reform UK, 30% had a favourable view of Jenrick, 27% had an unfavourable view, and 44% were undecided. I think a lot more are going to be decided in the coming days. Now, 26% of Conservatives had a favourable opinion, so 4 less. 20% had an unfavourable opinion, and 54% were undecided. And that's probably because a large portion of Conservative voters, those that remain, are too old to watch television or understand how to use a smartphone. One of Jenrick's team joked to me, half-joked, that he said one of the factors in prompting Rishi Sunak to call an early general election in July of 2024 was that they ran the numbers and 0.5% of the Conservative voter base would have died off if he would have waited till the end of the year because they were just that old. So it's only decrepit boomers with property and an interest in propping up the pension system so that they can squeeze more P&O cruises out of Nick 30-ands, who are still voting Conservative at this point. So the fact that Jenrick is now in Reform only damages the Conservatives because who have the Conservatives got left? Let's think about it in concrete terms. So other than just MPs who aren't so stupid or treacherous it's offensive, many of whom are still in Kemi's shadow cabinet, by the way. Remember, architect of the Boris wave, unrepentant demographic vandal Priti Patel is still Shadow Foreign Secretary, and Kemi is still palling around with a Diwali event. James Cleverly, deputy leader, whatever. Other than those people who are just irredeemable, you have a bunch of lightweights, and it doesn't matter if they get replaced. They might have some good intentions, but they're unremarkable, right? So of decent Conservative MPs, you've got, I would say, the standouts. Katie Lamb and Jack Rankin, 2024 intake, rising stars, untainted by the last government. You've got Nick Timothy, who, like Robert Jenrick, has been vindicated by his record at the Home Office, his writing papers on the incompetence or malfeasance of Raiku and the Islamic Network. So, he's solid. Neil O'Brien is trying to redeem himself, despite compiling lists of vaccine conspiracy theorists during COVID, and is now just like publishing data racism on the regular on Substack, calculating how much Indian and Nigerian immigration is costing us. Co-wrote that excellent paper with Robert Jenrick. Though now I think he just retweeted something earlier about Jenrick, saying something positive about Mel Stride in 2024, insinuating that there's no love lost between the two men, despite O'Brien being formerly in the Jenrick faction. And is there any others? I like Suella Braverman quite a lot. She would, of course, fall afoul of my general rule that says that only those with native ancestry can be politicians. It is a shame that we have to set that rule because pretty much every other immigrant heritage politician can't behave and they have conflicts of interest regarding foreign and immigration policy. But for the time being, Suella is a very sound politician. And it's no joke now that she's going to defect to Reform because Riel Braverman has rejoined and the Conservatives are a dead entity, and if Kemi has a monopoly over the leadership, she despises Suella and accused her of having a public mental breakdown shortly after the election, leaked against her. So you'll see Suella defecting soon. But other than them, who is a standout star? who can perform well at the dispatch box. Robert Jenrick was chewing out David Lammy and Shabana Mahmood regularly. Now they've got nobody to make headlines for them. And I think it was actually a mistake for Jack Rankin to signal that he wasn't going to defect. I think it was a mistake for Nick Timothy to now take Robert Jenrick's job as Shadow Justice Minister, because the Conservative Party are going to die. Robert Jenrick's speech today at his defection was him hammering the final nail in the coffin. And any cope on the part of the Conservatives at this point are just like tearing their nails off on the inside lid. And so it's a shame that those few people wouldn't be eligible to defect and perhaps bolster Reform's numbers, because Reform has fewer good personnel than it does bad at this point, despite being the presumptive next party of government. We need some good people in there. No matter minor your misgivings of Reform, things need to be focused on presuming they're going to form the next government and making them better. But from the perspective of the Conservatives, who else do they have? Like, there's those few good MPs, and they don't get much airtime. They're good thinkers, but they're not necessarily prominent. Other than Jenrick, what is their sales pitch? They're doomed. They are actually doomed, and they are so inflexible in their thinking. They're so arrogant, they're so hubristic, that they can't adjust. They cannot adapt, and if you don't adapt, you will, of course, die. So as the psychodrama panned out, we had reports, I think this one was from Politics Home, or Conservative Home. Jenrick got removed from the Tory WhatsApp chat, so that was the first sign that defection was imminent. And then Kemi Badenoch's team, the reason this happened is because Kemi Badenoch's team got a hold of his resignation speech that they say it was left lying around. It was probably at the top of a photocopier or a printer somewhere. He had cancelled the speaking engagement this weekend, and they were worried he was going to defect within the next 24 hours. Now, I have a reason to believe that Farage saying there was no imminent deal to be done is correct, and Reform weren't the only people that Jenrick was talking to. But Kemi Badenoch just pushed him straight into the arms of Farage with this by jumping the gun and getting paranoid. And so now she's created this massive stunt. All eyes are on Reform. The defection went off without a hitch, and Jenrick was just bodying the press during the conference, and bodying the rest of the party as well. So she decided to say, oh, we want to avoid all this psychodrama. Well, it turns out the entire day became a circus because of Kemi being, for once, far too early on things. And then the best part was Kevin Hollinrake, who was the chairman, who, again, just one of the members of the previous Conservative administration, unrepentant, useless, who insinuated that it came from inside Jenrick's inner circle itself. So someone close to Jenrick apparently leaked the brief. It wasn't just sort of lying around in the office, forwarded on to Conservative HQ, and therefore triggered his ousting. So someone who's conspiratorially minded might think that they wanted Jenrick to jump ship and needed the extra incentive, but there we go. But they sat there the entire day, and we've got loads of coke coming from the Conservatives saying Kemi is looking decisive. She's got leadership here. We're taking a clear stand. Kemi has just done a speech before the Scottish Conservatives saying that this is proof that Reform just tell people what they want to hear, and Labour don't care what people want to hear. And we're taking the time to formulate our policy and be honest with people. The truth is, most Conservative politicians are frustrated about their inability to go to the electorate and say anything because Kemi hasn't formulated any policy. There's no plan. She's deeply depressed. She doesn't really want to do the job. And she has surrounded herself with the likes of Henry Newman and Francis Maude, who were advisors to Cameron and Boris. So you've just got a bunch of failures and retards behind you. She was astroturfed by the Spectator crowd and the Paul Marshall network and Gove anyway. She is woefully underqualified and overpromoted. And now they're just sort of sticking their fingers in their ears and going la 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 la, not realising how badly this has backfired. And so it's just, we're going to get a bit of schadenfreude here before we obviously move to criticising Reform for their recent defections. And then there was this post. So she then got a lot of heat to actually publish the speech that was leaked before Jenrick gave it, because there was one MP who was still backing Jenrick saying, unless he signed it and sealed it with his own blood, just because it's a bit of paper with his name on it doesn't mean it's real. Robert wasn't going to defect. He wanted to run for the leadership again in May. Fact check true. Kemi needs to publish the evidence to back this up ASAP. So they ended up doing so. They ended up publishing bits of the speech, which were then delivered by Jenrick at the Reform Conference, saying that the Tories and Labour have forfeited the right to govern the United Kingdom, and the mantle now passes to Reform. Thanks to Zia and Richard, Reform's policies already meet the moment more than any other parties. I don't think that's true, but fine. They and Nigel know the extraordinary challenges Britain faces and requires a comprehensive plan to turn things around. Developing the best one possible will be a major priority for this year. For all these reasons, today I'm proud to become Reform's 281,000th member. I agree Britain is broken, in major decline, on the brink, in need of real change, and know neither the Conservatives nor Labour will deliver it. Come join Reform. And this is the crux of what he delivered, but he was even more scathing. Also, it's interesting to note Aaron Banks let slip. Aaron is the bold and brash id of the Reform Party from the old Brexit Party days, and it's a shame he didn't win his Bristol mayoralship, because that would have been very funny, having Banksy running Bristol. But he said there are at least 10 Conservative and Labour MPs lined up to defect. The tectonic plates of Reform UK politics are shifting fast. Now, this is proof of a preference cascade, but it doesn't mean that people have reassessed their priors. It means that they're seeing Reform as a bandwagon with momentum to jump upon in order to salvage their own career ambitions. And Reform are clearly very receptive to the pressure being placed on them by their base, the fact that they've been getting ratioed, by me included, in the last few days, saying, are you just going to take any old Tory defector? Are you really going to be a refugee camp for the Conservatives? Least of all, Labour. There's like one Labour MP that's doing something good at the moment. I forget his name, but he is breaking ranks with the party to protest the abolition of jury trials, something we'll talk about later in the week. Because that, I mean, from Edward Coke to Magna Carta to the 1689 Bill of Rights, these are the rights and ancient customs that Englishmen expect of themselves. And I'm sorry, we're not going to have David Lammy, who says, I'm from a tribe in Africa and I deserve reparations, to abolish this, just because he wants to make more efficient the bureaucratic process, and because he misread Bleak House and thought the Chancery Court was a criminal case rather than a civil case that depleted the Jarndyce fortune. Anyway, total more. I don't think David Lammy has actually read a book, let alone Bleak House. Have you seen how thick it is? Maybe if it was a pop-up version. Anyway, point being, they've already announced that they're going to get a Labour defection next Tuesday. People are expecting it's Claire Hoey. But it isn't necessarily a strength for Reform to have all of these people coming over if they don't add something. I think Jenrick adds something. I don't think most of the other defections have added anything. Someone's called me a functional retard in chat, and there's proof that disabled can function in society. I mean, that is true. I'm a high-level autist. I know my place. This is the thing. I don't actually want to be an MP. I don't want to be involved in frontline politics. I know that I exist to have a Spurg level of analysis that is indifferent to whichever doors it closes for me. I mean, again, I think you can kind of trust my analysis because I'm banned from both parties. It's not like I have a vested interest in seeing one party or the other have a relative advantage over one another. I just want the country to be fixed, and I want the problems to be solved, and then, hey, maybe I can go back to doing like more Batman videos and gardening. That would be nice. But anyway, that's nice. So, some of Jenrick's allies also confirmed they're not going to be defecting to Reform. It will be a lonely transition. This is what I mentioned about Rankin and Timothy. I think it's a mistake. If you notice, Suella Braverman has kept her powder dry. And that's because there was a inclination to defect earlier last year, but the Rupert Lowe treatment did spook her. And that's something we shouldn't forget, by the way. Even if Reform makes some encouraging moves, like possibly taking in Jenrick or improving on their policy, like promising to deport the Boris wave and rip the guts out of the civil service, even though Danny Kruger's actual policy on that is a bit opaque. I share Pete North, fellow Spurg's criticisms on this. They haven't published much detail in terms of their policy, you know, repealing the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, Constitutional Reform Act, Equalities Act, Companies Act, abolishing the Supreme Court, using orders in council, all these sorts of things. But also there is a mind that you don't telegraph your moves to the enemy ahead of time to give them time to move against you. So, you know, they need a decent poker face. What they need to be doing instead is signaling to their base to stop them from getting jittery. You need to start drip feeding talking points through the ranks so that they disseminate down to the messengers. And they're not very good at doing that. They started doing that. I had some conversations with some people within Reform that were very keen to sort of give me and some other figures some reassurance when they were doing something wrong. Some of those signals are stopped from those people, so it might be a good idea to start listening to and reassuring the base again. But the fact that Nigel keeps saying, don't worry, we're going to vet the Tories that come to us, we're not just a retirement home for Tories, means that they are feeling a bit of the heat. So, yet again, keep chimping on social media. Anyway, so this was the response from the other parties before we actually get to the press conference. Starmer said it shows Badenoch's weakness. Jenrick has been making toxic comments and tried to divide our country for months and months and months. Now, the thing is, Starmer is both happy and petrified that Jenrick is no longer in the Conservatives. Because he gave, late last year, an interview that was then reprinted in the Telegraph. And he had said that, words to the effect of, the Conservative Party are the only thing standing in the way of the actual far right, which he thinks is reform. Now, he has got no idea of the groundswell of sentiment among Reform's base and the online commentary. He has some idea because, of course, he and Shabana Mahmood were railing against the phantom of ethno-nationalism during their Labour Party conference speeches. I think they're sick of being ratioed by Steve Laws. But anyway, they don't realise that Reform themselves are actually the furthest right wing of liberalism. Reform want to make the system stable, and their main complaint with the Uniparty is that they are insufficiently liberal in the Thatcherite sense. I think they misunderstand liberalism. We'll get onto Gwaine Towler's comments on this later, and how they still want to do the sort of like Cameron, modern Britain, moderate Muslim, everyone holds hands and sings Kumbaya, the public-private distinction, all of these fallacies that require a Leviathan state to manage tensions between communities, and at least Labour is the more honest version of that. But Reform's main complaint is that these parties engage in divisive identity politics. They pit us against one another with hate speech legislation, and if we just allowed full meritocracy and free speech, all tensions would calm down, everyone would work together, we'd all just get along with our own lives, and those tensions between communities would fall away. And it's a fundamentally liberal ideal. I think it's incorrect. I think it's just not going to work, and we need to be honest about human nature and intractable tribalisms, and the fact that some cultures and peoples just don't belong here. However, Reform fundamentally do not disagree with the premises of Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer just goes around bringing this utopia into being with the militant measures prescribed by socialism. So he is actually wrong in his analysis that Reform are the bogeyman, the sort of reincarnation of Adolf Hitler and Oswald Mosley that he's petrified of at night. They're not even as harsh as Enoch Powell, who himself was a civic nationalist. But instead, he is very content to have the Conservatives remain as the zombie, the zombie opposition that his zombie government are propped up against to act as containment levers against something further to the right coming along. And in his case as well, don't forget, further to the left, because he purged the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn and returned the sort of centrist, Blairite, Zionist consensus to being the dominant faction in the party. So he's petrified of anything but civil service compliant centrism ruling the day. And he knows for a fact that the Conservatives will just be that. They might tinker with the worst excesses of the ECHR and deport the most offensive cases of illegal immigration that show up in the Telegraph, because that defines their entire worldview. If you want to understand the id of the Tory party, read the pages of the Telegraph at this point. It's become so vapid, it's almost indigestible, despite a couple of good writers still being there. But he understands that if the Tory party goes, Labour goes with it. And so, Jenrick walking away, this is why he's saying Badenoch is weak, Jenrick needed to be excised, but he's also petrified at the same time of the fact that Jenrick has basically gotten away with saying Birmingham is a slum, nobody integrates. Because that's just true. Because this used to be a vote farm for the Labour Party. They relied on rubbing the right's nose in diversity and rendering its arguments out of date, according to Andrew Nether, who wrote speeches for Tony Blair. So as much as he's petrified of the rhetorical direction of travel by Reform and Robert Jenrick, he's still desperate for the Conservatives to be electorally viable while also being indistinguishable from the Lib Dems. And so he's at once glad that Jenrick has been purged, but also petrified. Interesting reaction. Zach Polanski is rubbing his hands with glee today because he's actually honest about this. he's actually got much better framing for his faction, but his faction is like a 15% cul-de-sac, and that it only grows because of the demographic fodder that the Conservatives and Labour have provided it through mass third world migration. But Polanski said it wasn't the racism, it wasn't the rule breaking, it wasn't the corruption. No, Jenrick gets removed for plotting. Politics for too many leaders is just a game, not a moral one. It's why people are crying out for hope. Replace the names in that tweet, and it could have been posted by Zoran Mamdani. He's going for this coalition of the imported resentful and demented progressive against the native population and the existing parties. And this is why he's going to snap up a lot of Labour constituencies, because he is authentically left-wing, in that he's rote-learned all of the most radical talking points. And because he's not in government, he has no pressure to deliver on these things, so he can just occupy the sort of Greta Thunberg or Zoran Mamdani position and snatch up all of those voters who have been disillusioned by Labour being unable to hold together their coalition of the people who want to hear the Island of Strangers speech written by Morgan McSweeney, and also all of the people who hope that Keir Starmer would live up to his Pabloist credentials of being pro-trans, pro-green, pro-migrant. So this is a net win today for both the Green Party and Reform, and Labour and the Conservatives will just keep hemorrhaging losses. Now, this was the most interesting part of the conference today, because Nigel Farage announced his appointed leader of Reform in Scotland. It was Lord Malcolm something, former Conservative Lord, worked with Sunak and Boris, pro-net zero, very frustrating, very tepid. But from around this point, this was one of the most interesting parts, because he spoke about, his first question was about Jenrick defecting to Reform, and he teased that he would call him later in the day and put something together. He also noted, and this is just a side note, that net zero specifically was a focus of his because he wanted to make Britain competitive, and I wrote this quote down, in 21st century technologies, particularly data banks and crypto mining. The reason I raise all of this is because this is relevant to the later defections. The power games being played by Zia Yusuf, Richard Tice, Isabel Oakeshott, the admission of Nadim Zahawi into the party, because Isabel Oakeshott was selling this as he's got connections in Dubai and internationally, he's a wealthy businessman. What they're focused on is the tech sector that is very profitable for not just Dubai, but also America and the Israelis, because these are all sort of military, defense, Bitcoin, all things like this that are being innovated in those sort of capital hubs around the world. And Jenrick actually provides a pretty good bolster to that agenda because of his connections to the domestic and international Israeli lobby. His wife is an American Israeli dual citizen, I believe. I believe he's personally converted to Judaism. His kids are Jewish. And the reason that lots of people thought he might actually win the Conservative leadership election is because, and these were just the open whispers in Westminster, he's got all the Jewish donors behind him, whereas Kemi didn't have any. She just had the Telegraph, Unheard, the Spectator, the Tory apparatchiks in her corner, and that ended up winning out. But Jenrick had most of the money power. And Reform themselves have been positioning in the last few months or so, in light of the Iranian Revolution, in light of contentions around Somalia, as being part of the, it's not unfair to say, Zionist faction, which means that the interests of international capital and a certain view of foreign policy that was sequestered within the Conservative Party and fell in behind Jenrick because they became discontented after October the 7th with Labour, the Lib Dems, and the Progressives' appeasement of the Palestinian cause, and who also see Farage as not just the next party of government, but a sympathetic ear, they're all coalescing behind Reform. And this is driving a lot of the decisions in Reform. It's international policy prospectus, but also investment from donors and the ability to attract back talent that has fled overseas to America or to Dubai, Brits who have invested in crypto or AI or military tech. And so I'm only saying this because these are the sort of considerations that are playing into the faction wars that is causing the drive of these defections into Reform, causing the Conservative Party to capsize and risking Reform morphing into Conservative Party 2.0. But anyway, I'm going to play this short clip. There's an interesting explanation here for today's events.
Up on the news about Mr. Jenrick, Are you picking?
I don't know how many more permutations of this we've got left, you know, but I'll keep trying for you, you know.
Are you picking up any resistance within Reform to all these Tories coming over from one of the so-called establishment parties that you say need to be replaced?
2 points on that. The worries I get from within Reform are, one, will they bring Tory infighting with them? Because we had 4.5 years of psychodrama with that last Conservative government, where they fought each other in public, they fought each other in private. And so if people want to bring that with them, they're not wanted by our membership, they're not wanted by our board, and they're not wanted by me. And that's the first thing I would say. And secondly, you know, we will not be Tory Party 2.0, because we have a completely different set of policies. And people that come have to say they admit that net zero, mass migration, North Sea taxes, and many other things were a terrible mistake. They have to make real mea culpas. And anyway, I'll cheer you all up next week, because I'll have a Labour defection next week, and that'll change the script, won't it?
So, a few things in that. Obviously, the reason I played that is because Farage is clearly susceptible to the fact that the base has given him a lot of backlash for taking many Tory defectors, me included. By the way, pretty much all my commentary, I've said this before, but for those who are new around here, because we've surpassed 100,000 subscribers, and so there are plenty of you who are new, pretty much all my commentary is carrot and stick. I do things in the moment to achieve ends based on sincerely held principles, but to nudge political parties one way or the other. And what we should be focused on doing, presuming Reform is the next party of government, is providing them with a social and political cost to taking in any old Tory defector, any architect of the Boris wave, any traitor, anyone who immiserated us. And this is why the backlash and the Dim Zahawi defection is very important. This is what Farage is responding to, because that went down like a brick in a duck pond. People said, I think it was Luke Trill who said that Starmer has a reverse Midas touch, meaning that basically every balloon he touches turns to lead, and that was Farage for the last few days until Jenrick's defection. But it was important here that Farage felt the need to signal, not just to within his own party, but to his base and to potential defectors, that if you come to Reform, you admit defeat, in a way, but also culpability for any role you played in the mistakes of the previous government, and you submit to the new doctrine of net zero and mass migration being a problem. Now. Good, purely words. And the reason I say this is because if you look at what David Cameron did to the Conservative Party, which he bragged about in 2022 in the Times in a piece that said we were all white men, and I decided to do something about that, explaining that he did diversity shortlists to stop him from being called the nasty party, as Theresa May put it when she was Conservative Party chair in the early 2000s, following the years of May and Major and Thatcher. What Cameron did is he staffed his party full of diversity hires, and then presumed that everyone would be on the same page. The conceit of liberalism is, again, thinking that everyone wants the same thing, and that all politics is purely ideological and based on material and rational incentives. When instead, Priti Patel gets into government, and immediately you get 250,000 Indians every year because she's referring to them as living bridges, because she's an ethnic partisan. Because she and Rishi Sunak want to celebrate Diwali in government buildings. So the problem you get is the people make up the party, and personnel dictate policy. And no matter what policy you propose, you've still got your personnel to pass it, sell it, and stand by it. And so if you fill up with Tory defectors who haven't learned their lesson, what you get is, yes, they might, much like every citizenship ceremony, put their hand on the book and swear the pledge to British values, and the next day, because there's no cost to reneging on that promise, abandon it and just fester in the party and frustrate your agenda if they take personal umbrage to it. And so if you fill up with diversity hires, for example, if you have one MP, like Sarah Pochin, who proposes a burqa ban, and Zia Yusuf, frustrated that he wasn't told ahead of time, because he wasn't, and that it seemed to be a slight against Muslims, jumps up and down, tells himself in half like Rumpelstiltskin and throws a fit and leaves, then you've got to clean up that mess, right? You don't want a lot of that happening when you're trying to get a radical agenda done. And that's if you do want a radical agenda done, which is what Reform's voters want, regardless of whether or not the party can deliver on it. So it would be a total disaster for Farage to take in large numbers of Tory defectors, even if they pledge allegiance to reversing net zero, deporting the Boris wave, sending all illegal immigrants home. But it was interesting that, again, sufficient pressure has been exerted on reform that Nigel Farage needed to say, when he said that he was going to call Robert Jenrick during this clip, and I won't play it, he said, "We don't want reform to be a life raft for failing political careers." Interesting. I don't think Robert Jenrick's career is failing. His star is not fading. The likes of Nadim Zahawi and Nadine Dorries, who are obviously trying to give a soft landing to Boris Johnson, who Nigel Farage said today is not welcome in the party because the Boris wave is unforgivable. Those people have no political capital. They are hated by the base. And so it isn't very sensible to admit them if reform wants to position itself as the replacement for the Tories in an authentic sense, in being an actual party representing the national interest, rather than just being the Tories with a teal coat of paint. And so, after that morning conference, you then got this announcement from Reform and Robert Jenrick. And, I mean, I just want to pause on, like, one of the... Perfect. They both look like the cat that got the cream. And Jenrick's speech was the final nail in the coffin of the Conservative Party. I mean, he said during the speech, I wrote this quote down, "The fact is, the Conservative Party is so compromised it cannot speak for the country. The party hasn't changed, and it won't. They don't have the stomach. The divisions, the delusions are still there. It's like your best friend talking you out of giving the BPD e-girl that you've been dating one last chance." I don't speak from experience. Purely hypothetically, of course. No e-girls, ever. Maybe Amelia. Anyway, so Jenrick here aired tons of the Conservatives' dirty laundry. I'm going to play a clip that has been captured by Guido Fawkes. He went after Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, Priti Patel, Shadow Foreign Secretary, the party in general. He said that the party under Sunak repeatedly put out policies that they knew weren't going to work to distract the voters from the fact that they just needed the constant demographic churn to get cheap labour in. Boris Johnson said, he wanted the Financial Times to like him again, so he opened the floodgates. He said that there was too much money sloshing around after COVID because of the stimulus programs, the furlough schemes that Rishi Sunak and Michael Gove pushed for. And so to soak up all that excess cash, he needed to just bring in raw bodies to ensure that inflation didn't get out of control, according to the OBR modelling. And so Jenrick just decided to say, look, all of these people have been lying to you. It's the Dave Chappelle skit about Trump having played the rigged game inside the house, and then he walks outside the house to everyone protesting and said, "Everyone in that house in there, you're right, they've been ripping you off the entire time," and then walks back in and continues playing the game. But Jenrick was candid and basically confirmed everything that those who have been feeling the contours of politics for some years already speculated. I'll let him speak for himself.
The Conservative Party in Westminster isn't sorry. It doesn't get it. It hasn't changed. It won't change. It can't change. Now, the people I'm about to mention are all decent people. But because I'm here today, I need to explain myself. I owe that to you, the public, and to the people who elect me. Look at the top table. The Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, has rightly attacked Labour for hiking taxes to fund more scrounging. But there's just one problem. He was the Cabinet Minister who oversaw the explosion of the welfare bill. And it was him who blocked the reforms that are needed. Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, created the very migration system that enabled 5 million migrants to come here. The greatest failure of any British government in the post-war period. When asked about this last year, she defended her actions. She doesn't believe she did anything wrong. Now look, I respect Kemi, but I don't trust the Conservative Party on immigration. Just 2 current Conservative MPs voted with me against the fraudulent plan to stop the boats. 2 out of all the Conservative Party. Last year, I said the rape gang disgrace was in part because people with medieval attitudes towards women and girls had been allowed into our country. Would you believe it? Several Conservative MPs complained about me for speaking out. They said I was wrong, and I shouldn't be saying that about the record of the last Conservative government.
So the Conservative Party, no shock, were more concerned about protecting the reputation of a community that produces a disproportionate number of foreign rapists and those that cover up for them, than about, and their own reputation, by proxy, hitching their reputation to the Pakistani community, probably not the best idea, than they were about protecting English children. And again, Jenrick's been very solid on this. Sam Bidwell's worked with Jenrick for quite some time. Sam was responsible in his set 2 with Fraser Nelson in, what was it, December 2024, January 2025, for reigniting the discussion internationally about the Pakistani grooming gang scandal. So Jenrick's camp have been solid on this, and in this speech, he just flayed the Conservatives alive. And so I've seen people saying, oh, you know, Jenrick's defection will actually be the end of reform because it shows they've got no credibility. No. Conservatives have nothing left to offer. It shows a preference cascade of talent after a few days of terrible Conservative defections, and makes people forget about most of the bad defections. Now, we're not going to forget about them. We're going to go through them. But before I do so, let me just explain how seismically bad Kemi's move was. Not through the medium of interpretive dance, but instead, just by showing you all of the acrimony between Farage and Jenrick over the last year or so, that they were able to totally sidestep in one conference. Because instead, most of the conversation was about the fact that the Conservative Party don't get it, they're too toxic, they're incapable of learning, Kemi Badenoch bungled his ousting, and so they could just step over it and say, well, let bygones be bygones, because clearly the Conservative Party aren't putting up a better offering, so you kind of have to just settle for reform. And by the way, so I am currently not impressed enough to be voting for reform. I'm abstaining at the moment. I'm not involved in any political party. Again, my efforts to focus on either encouraging the things I like or discouraging the things I don't like. I don't think they've won me over enough yet. But there are lots of people that make the argument that reform is all we've got, we need to oust the Uniparty, and so we need to vote for them no matter what, and focus on forcing them to be better after they win. There are lots of people that I respect that basically make that argument. There are plenty of people that I don't respect that also make that argument, and I think underestimate the utility of forcing people inside your political camp to listen to your concerns rather than just relentlessly attacking the enemy who aren't amenable to your concerns anyway. They maybe don't understand the role that I'm playing. But I do think that whether or not reform will govern competently, unless there is a drastic change in political circumstances that are unforeseen, and we'll talk about that later, they will be the next party of government. And Jenrick taking the last bit of remaining talent with him, save a couple of the MPs I mentioned earlier, is an encouraging sign that they might be a bit more competent than we've currently feared. But, again, Jenrick and Farage had a very fierce war of words over the last year, especially around the Bell Hotel in Epping protests, where both men were trying to capitalise on the energy of Operation Raise the Colours, the flag protests across the country, and also the fact that large numbers of women coming out as part of the Pink Ladies protests to condemn the dispersal of largely foreign sex offenders from the Horn of Africa and the Middle East in their neighbourhoods next to their children's schools. And so Farage accused Jenrick of lying, being no friend of Epping, giving illegal migrants free hotels. He then said, Jenrick is a fraud, and I've always thought so, and this quote proves it. And this was clipped from Jenrick speaking in November 2022, I think it was on the BBC. More hotels have been coming online almost every month throughout the whole year. What I have done is procure even more. Jenrick responded to Farage, I think it was the previous one, saying that you're rattled. So they were locked back and forth. And Zia Yusuf said much the same. So he even coined the Jenrick wave regarding the Afghanistan evacuation, where the British government took out a super injunction to block public knowledge of the moving of untold thousands of Afghans. One person had up to 22 members of his extended family and clan brought into the country because the judge decided that family means something different in that part of the world. So, you know, you can bring your friends and your cousins and your wives. All the same thing. Over at taxpayers' expense. Jenrick actually celebrated the Afghan evacuation and marketed it as if they were all interpreters and British military servicemen. Turns out loads of them are drug dealers, Taliban members, and sex criminals. And so Zia has a fierce rivalry with Jenrick. He coined the Jenrick wave. They were arguing back and forth for quite some time in the aftermath of the El Fatah scandal. He said, Jenrick, the government you served in granted this genocidal maniac UK citizenship. Now it's been revealed that during COP27, your leader lobbied the Egyptian president directly to bring El Fatah to Britain. Unbelievably, Sunak was even shown excerpts from his posts inciting violence and the killing of army and police officers while Jenrick was immigration minister. Because obviously Jenrick is complaining about David Lammy and Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper celebrating this. Of course, Zia could also criticise, as I did, the likes of James Cleverly and who's the insufferably Alicia Kearns. They were personally lobbying for many years to bring them in. At least Jenrick had the temerity, the resolve to resign from his post when he realised the Rwanda scheme wouldn't work. But you can see that Zia Yusuf perceived Jenrick as a rival, whether he took over the Conservative Party or now that he's defected to Reform. And it's important to focus on this because there are multiple factions within Reform, and Zia constitutes one of them. The people who facilitated Jenrick's transition into the party are not the Zia faction. Some of the members might get on with him behind the scenes. They might have mutuals. But Zia was not happy about this. I can guarantee it. Zia is not happy now that his path to succeeding Nigel Farage is no longer uncontested. And so it is beneficial to those of us who do not feel represented by Zia Yusuf, who thinks he behaved reprehensibly regarding Rupert Lowe, and who thinks it is unfortunate that he has not been sufficiently punished by the party for his misconduct. It is beneficial for us that Robert Jenrick now has a position of seniority in the party, because it does not make Zia Yusuf taking over from Nigel Farage a foregone conclusion. So, Zia and Jenrick continue to exchange a war of words, including, with the Online Safety Act. Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman voted for it, so presumably there's another super secret reason there to inflict this treachery on all of us too. Rael Braverman, of course, wasn't very happy about the fact that Zia keeps attacking his wife. But again, Zia, despite having a position of prominence over policy and doing the media rounds, having been installed in the party by Paul Marshall, reminder, Paul Marshall used to own GB News, owns Unheard. The Spectator is about to buy The Telegraph with the help of the Daily Mail. He owns Jordan Peterson's ARC conference. He's the father, of course, of Winston Marshall, who interviews a lot of high-profile guests and gets the scoop on people in Reform, like formerly Rupert Lowe, but also Zia Yusuf. He interviewed Nigel Farage. He interviewed Majid Nawaz, who, of course, has been consulting with Farage on winning over the moderate Muslim vote, which Majid's been very nice to me in the occasion that I've met and spoken with him, but I just fundamentally disagree with him on that. I should probably set something up with him at some point. I've said that before, but would be good to hash this out before a camera. But Zia was introduced, and I've heard this now from multiple sources, to Nigel by Paul Marshall. So he has a lot of money power behind him, and I think he doesn't like the fact that Jenrick is not unattached from that money power network, but that he represents a potential rival candidate to, should Farage leave government early. And of course, if it's opened up to a vote within the party, he no longer is just de facto coronated. Also, there's a contingency plan for, again, if he decides to crash out, because he's now done it twice, and, well, if it's against Poachin and Lowe, we're noticing a pattern here. He's become an unreliable loose cannon. So, anyway, he keeps arguing with Robert Jenrick. Explicitly, he found an old video from Jack Anderton, how curious, saying that Robert Jenrick said that Britain was a nation of immigrants built by immigrants. Jenrick was complaining that Zia had to delete multiple tweets. So there's a lot of bad blood between both men, and this reached quite absurd proportions when whoever it was that was controlling Zia's Twitter account, because I know that Zia doesn't control his Twitter account all the time, by the way. I've spoken to the person that writes some of Zia's tweets, and he's actually a good guy, if he's still doing so. But I just disagree with him on being so bullish for Zia. But it looks like he was going through the comments and mistakenly liked a post that called Robert Jenrick a traitorous zogbot with a Jewish wife and family. Disavow. Needlessly pugilistic and insulting. No need to be that. Zia has himself said that this was a mistake. Robert Jenrick didn't accept his apology for insulting his family. So again, there's a lot of no love lost here. He said, the mask has slipped, likes are private, you thought nobody would ever know. Unfortunately for you, the racist account who posted the tweet could see the likes and expose you. Reform should give you the boot. So now they've got to coexist in the party, but their pressure to reconcile their differences has been alleviated by how badly Kemi Badenoch botched the announcement. And this was actually Zia Yusuf's response to Kemi's announcement and Robert Jenrick. He said, hilarious, Kemi begins the brutal purge of those most likely to challenge her in May post the electoral wipeout. James cleverly keep your phone on the last days of Rome. Now, I could be wrong, but since I've gone live, I don't think Zia Yusuf has actually celebrated. No, he hasn't. He hasn't celebrated Robert Jenrick's defection. He was mocking it earlier, saying the stuff lying around at Robert Jenrick's office was a signed Nigel Farage football t-shirt. And then, during the press conference where Jenrick defected, he said, 7th of May deadline, then no more Tories. So what Zia is doing, so Farage has agreed to this to position himself as saying, we're not desperate for Tory defectors, we get it, the base doesn't like it. But what Zia has done here is try to reposition himself as being in a position of authority over who gets to be allowed in the party by saying, here's the hard cut-off, here's what I'm comfortable with, because he doesn't like the fact that Jenrick's joined the party. He doesn't like the fact that there's now a rival. Also, it's very interesting, if you scroll through Zia's feed, there is no celebration of Nadim Zahawi defecting to the party, no celebration of the councillors, not even a retweet. And actually, also, no real celebration of Layla Cunningham becoming London Mayor. Now, I believe that he was on GB News and he was asked about it, and he said she's going to be a competent candidate. But he hasn't felt the need to come out and signal his allegiance with the given faction, and it doesn't seem like he likes the Tory defections, and that's because he is opposed to most of the Conservative defections that have happened. In fact, the Conservative defections are part of a different faction than Zia belongs to. So we've already said about the Paul Marshall backing behind Zia Yusuf. We've already said about Robert Jenrick's faction. One person in Jenrick's faction is actually Tom Skinner. So Tom Skinner, you'll know of him as Mr. Bosch. And Zia has amplified Tom before. So I don't think there's any acrimony between them. But Tom, as you'll know, was at the Now in England conference with Robert Toombs and Rupert Lowe and Danny Kruger last summer in June. And he infamously gave a very poetic speech about his love of the country. And there was a lot of talk around this time about the prospect of him running for London Mayor, potentially as the Conservative candidate or as an independent. Then he went on Strictly Come Dancing, basically trying to rerun the increase your public profile PR boost that Nigel Farage did with I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, disappearing into the Australian jungle and coming third, I think. And the tabloids descended on Tom Skinner, and he got voted out, I think, in the first week, because he just wasn't that very good at ballroom dancing, which is an endorsement in my book. But now he's coming out and saying, I back reform. So he's not positioning himself as the potential Conservative London mayoral candidate. He's certainly not positioning himself as a London mayoral candidate, because they've already granted it to Layla Cunningham. Now he's just falling in behind reform as a party. He is close personal friends with James Orr. He is friends with JD Vance, as well as a friend of James Orr. He also, it's very important, went to a barbecue in the summer with Vance, and it was either the same day or the following day. Danny Kruger and Robert Jenrick also went to the same barbecue dinner. There are also a few members of the Conservative Party. I think it was Katie Lamb, Chris Philp, and someone else. And I think Marshall was present as well. Michael Gove might have been present. And they were all palling it up and talking about the British right and introducing key figures to JD Vance to confer legitimacy upon them from the Americans. And the Americans, I must say, are quite sceptical of reform at the moment. And part of the reason they're sceptical of reform is because of Nigel Farage consistently counter-signalling mass deportations. It's because Rupert Lowe, of course, went on Tucker Carlson's show and made himself known to the American right. But it's also because, for all of the direct line that some of Reform's people have to Vice President Vance or to Trump himself, or the likes of, Seb Gorka, who was asking why Nigel Farage has basically cucked out on things recently. There are a bunch of Capitol Hill staffers who listen to me. Hello, chaps. I'm sure I'm going to get some WhatsApps from you after this one. And that trickles upwards to the administration. If you don't think that members of the Trump administration, the Zoomers on the inside, then set the agenda for the department, slide things across to their bosses' desks who make the final decisions, if you don't think that, we've chatted, or they listen to my show and try to keep an ear to the ground for British politics, if you don't think that my complaints about Zia Yusuf or Layla Cunningham, my skepticism of those people, my displeasure at Islam being accommodated in reform, my frustration about their unwillingness to talk about demographics and counter-signaling mass deportations, if you don't think that that hasn't set some of the priorities for America liaising with reform as one of Europe's right-wing populist party, then you might want to reconsider that. And so you may want to reconsider your messaging and your policies and your strategy for engaging with the Trump administration, because there are lots of people in the States that are lukewarm on reform because of some of the personnel and policy decisions that they've made, and some of those can't be reversed, not without significant embarrassment, but some of them can, and you should probably address them. And so it's very interesting that Skinner is part of the faction with Jenrick, they're friendly, with James, and he is now positioning himself behind Reform UK despite not having the mayoral role. But one of the other factions, so not Jenrick and James and Tom Skinner's faction, not Zia Yusuf and the Paul Marshall Network faction, but one of the other factions is Richard Tice and his fiancée, Isabel Oakeshott. And what's fascinating is Tice didn't know about the conversations with Jenrick and was caught entirely off guard, and had to dance around the fact that perhaps he'd heard rumours, but certainly didn't know of whether or not a defection was imminent, and certainly wasn't told about a deal happening this afternoon. And part of the reason that a lot of these Tory defectors have happened is because they've been speaking to Tice and Oakeshott. And Tice and Oakeshott have tried to bolster their relatively weak presence in the party, because, remember, Tice used to lead Reform UK. He was very close friends with Paul Oakenden, who used to be, I think it was the chairman or the treasurer. And he was gotten rid of in the early days of Nigel taking over after the general election. Tice, he isn't held in high regard by a lot of the friends and backers of Nigel Farage. Like, they call him Tice but dim. They think he's doing a terrible job on the media. He frequently fucks up. He, as I've said before, he thinks of himself as Hugh Grant from Love Actually, and he's actually Hugh Grant from Bridget Jones. A little bit sleazy, a little bit fake. And so he's recognised that he's lost a little bit of power, that he's not an automatic pick for Chancellor, that actually, even though he and Isabel sounded the trumpets for Zia Yusuf coming into the party as the second coming of David Cameron with diversity body armour, in fact, Zia Yusuf has kind of supplanted him as second in command, and his star has faded. And so what they have done instead is they facilitated the inflow of quite a few Tory defectors. And don't forget, Isabel Oakeshott became a lot more prominent in the last few years because she was the person who interviewed Matt Hancock and helped him write his book, the tell-all book about COVID. They, both Richard Tice and Isabel, flew out to meet Matt Hancock when he was coming out of the I'm a Celebrity jungle, when he had the gall to go on that after putting us under house arrest for a couple of years while he was cheating on his missus and abandoning his kids. So they are well connected within Boris's cabinet. They still, I think she has an ex-Conservative MP working for her, the really tall guy. The one that, mogged Rishi Sunak in that photo. But they have a lot of connections within Boris's sphere. And that's why Nadine Dorries and Jake Berry and seemingly Nadim Zahawi have now jumped ship. That's why all of Boris's old friends and cabinet ministers have moved in to Reform UK to set up a parallel power base to Zia Yusuf. And now, increasingly, the likes of Robert Jenrick and such. So there is a faction war going on within Reform, and you can, again, see the contours from the outside. But Tice told Julia Hartley-Brewer earlier today on Talk, and again, to caught off guard, she was saying, are you out of the loop? He just said he didn't know about the Jenrick defection. And I think he's being honest here. One of the other dead giveaways that they didn't want Jenrick in the party is the fact that Lord Ashcroft was promoting Kemi Badenoch. Lord Ashcroft, by the way, doesn't get on with Zia Yusuf. Zia Yusuf has counter-signalled him multiple times on X, because Zia Yusuf is very adamant about no more Tory defections. But Lord Ashcroft was celebrating Kemi Badenoch's exile of Robert Jenrick from the Conservative Party. And he says that she's a rising star. I mean, totally deluded. Lord Ashcroft and Isabel Oakeshott are, if not working together, I've heard mixed things, friends. So there is connective tissue here between the Oakeshott and Tice camp and the Tory party and some of the Grand Viziers who still like Kemi Badenoch and who still like Boris and who don't like Jenrick and are frustrated today about the fact that Jenrick now has a de facto senior position in Reform. Someone who really doesn't like Jenrick, who I can't place in the faction war, and neither can many insiders, is Layla Cunningham. Now, we've discussed Layla Cunningham earlier last week with the fact that Reform UK are now insistent on giving us another Muslim mayor of London. And it was only a week ago today that she told Camilla Tominey and Tim Stanley on the Daily Tea podcast that it was under Jenrick that the migrant hotel situation flourished. We had a peak amount of hotels. I don't feel the Conservatives have atoned for their sins. I'm actually quite sick and tired of them going up there and calling out all the problems they had caused and offering solutions. They had 14 years, actually, to do that. I mean, that's totally correct. You were going to run as Conservative candidate in 2024 in bloody Rotherham, though, Layla, so we don't trust you. Anyway, so she says she doesn't want Jenrick in the party. Well, even though she's one of Reform's rising stars, she's a media spokesperson, she's going to be their London mayoral candidate, one, doesn't really get say over Jenrick's presence, and two, I have heard from within Reform, and again, I've been a very vocal critic of Layla Cunningham. I've had one of the higher viewed videos on Layla's career history. I have heard from within the Reform, she's very ambitious, but we kind of know she's not going to win anyway, and she has a higher chance of winning, given the demographics of London, than any of her other candidates could have, but it's kind of the perfect wasted candidacy, because we can just sort of give her it, and then if she doesn't have a hope in hell, well, we can at least say that we tried, and then she doesn't end up as an MP, and she can just sort of float around in the party, and we don't really have to deal with her, because she doesn't have a natural power base within the party. She doesn't have one of the factions actually fighting for her. She kind of gets on with everyone, but actually has no real allies. So again, just very interesting internal power politics here that we're getting a sense of. And the internal faction wars being a subject of a kind of media plaything was revealed again earlier today by Tim Shipman in the Spectator rundown of this. Yes, I still occasionally watch some of the Spectator's content. Unfortunately, I have to soldier through it, ladies and gentlemen. But Tim Shipman actually said earlier today, quote, I would say a little bit of a role here is for the Spectator in kicking out Jenrick, in that we had our Parliamentarian of the Year awards in November, and Jenrick won Campaigner of the Year, but gave a speech in which a lot of the jokes died on stage, and it's a big cross-party audience. We have in there a lot of Tories, donors, senior Labour people from the government, and a lot of Reform as well. And I think people watching that thought that James Cleverly, who was hosting the awards, did rather better from the sort of Tory point of view than Jenrick did, and there was a bit of sort of sense that the Jenrick bubble had deflated at that point. So they use these events to mix politicians and make it so there's a big club, and if you aren't in it, then it's hard to get ahead. But they also use the awards ceremony to create the impression that Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Conservative Party was unshakable, that Robert Jenrick had no hope in hell of succeeding her as leader, so there's no point in trying to trade out the leader, and that they lined up James Cleverly as their contingency plan anyway, which is why he's been moved to the deputy leader position. He was actually promoted despite his incompetence as Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary. So, as you can see here, the Marshall Network owns a Spectator, promoting Zia, wants Robert Jenrick basically out of the picture because he represents a threat to the natural succession of Zia Yusuf under Nigel Farage, and it seems that it hasn't worked out. So again, even though if you're sceptical of Jenrick's sincerity, it's a good thing if you don't want Zia to become the automatic next Prime Minister. And Jenrick has some relative strengths because of where he is positioned in the overall structure of politics, both foreign and domestic. So, and the following is going to be a value-neutral analysis, set your personal feelings about Israel and Palestine, about Iran, aside for a moment. We are just going to do a 1,000-foot view here, ladies and gentlemen. That's all. Value free. So, you'll all remember that Robert Jenrick, during a Conservative Friends of Israel event, during the Conservative Party conference in 2024, where he was vying for a leadership, not only wore a Hamas are terrorists hoodie, but he said that Israeli citizens should be given access to the fast-track passport system that's afforded in Britain to Americans, Australians, the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Europeans, because he wanted to reflect Israel being one of our closest allies. They use the E-gates, and he said every airport and point of entry in our country needs to have a Star of David over it to show we support Israel. Now, again, this will divide the audience. However, look at it dispassionately. Robert Jenrick has signalled to the unquestionably Zionist instincts of Reform UK, including Layla Cunningham, who has posed with a flag before, including Richard Tice, for example, a faction that doesn't necessarily like Jenrick, but Richard has signed the International Holocaust Education Trust Declaration on Holocaust Memorial Day. He fronted a campaign against anti-Semitism march on September the 7th, 2025, standing up front, funnily enough, with Michael Gove holding the banner there. So Reform themselves are a Zionist party. Again, set your feelings aside for a moment. So what Jenrick brings over from the Conservative Party is not just talent and experience and social media clicks, but also most of the remaining Jewish donor support for the Conservative Party. They will now be folded into Reform. And there have been, as well, plenty of British Jews who are still sticking around. Those of whom who increasingly don't, well, those who don't agree with Tommy Robinson, that faction is really quite growing, apparently. And those who don't still think that the Board of Deputies is entirely captured and needs to be destroyed, because I have heard that there are quite a lot of Jews who are frustrated with the fact that the Board of Deputies is a leftist organisation that doesn't represent what they think is the authentic Jewish community, including many non-Jews on there that are like holdovers from the Blair Progressive era. But there are members of the Board of Deputies that have come out in support of Nigel Farage in the recent manufactured controversy about his supposed racist comments made at school. And this is one of the reasons as well why the Board of Deputies released that statement about El Fatah, saying that he hates Jews and white people in general. You can see a movement towards positioning themselves with the centre-right, or at least the presumptive next party of government, which is Reform UK. And so Robert Jenrick's Zionism and his support from conservative donors and conservative Jews, again, increases his standing within the party. So if we're talking here about internal faction wars, having an aligned foreign policy position with the predisposition of the party, bringing over more donors, playing into that, the investment opportunities that Farage wants to cultivate with his anti-net zero stance, like AI, like defense technology, like server farms. All of these things make it more likely that Jenrick himself might surpass Zia Yusuf as the heir apparent to Reform. Again, doesn't matter how you feel about Israel personally. We're just doing a dispassionate analysis of the internal faction wars. And the fact that this might be the case is signalled by the fact that Nigel Farage himself, as the Prime Minister in waiting, has been increasingly signalling his foreign policy stances in the last few weeks. Here is him saying that he supports the recognition of Somaliland and giving it statehood. Now, apparently Farage has been a long-time supporter of Somaliland. It's like a pet cause of his. I know that a bunch of people have done this too. I think Nick Tenconi of UKIP did this, and Gavin Williamson of the Conservative Party, who's also part of Restore Britain, did this as well. But this comes quite recently, coinciding with, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu also saying that he recognises the statehood of Somaliland and they're an ally of Israel. And then Farage recently went to an Iranian revolution protest. He spoke about it at Reform's recent conference, saying, "Long live the revolution in Iran. Obama was mistaken for saying you could make a deal with Iran. We need to overthrow the mullahs and the Ayatollah and possibly bring back the son of the Shah, who's currently hiding out in Washington, D.C. at the moment." And he went to a protest, and with Nadim Zahawi, funnily enough, shortly after the defection, and he was weeping. Now, this video isn't AI, by the way. It's quite strange. Now, I'm not saying it's inauthentic. It's just strange that he has been moved to tears by these Iranian protests. Especially when... So I've hesitated to comment on any of this. We had this supposed authentic feminist uprising a few years ago, and it amounted to basically nothing because the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guard are effective in repressing public discontent because they just kill people and face no consequences for it. So I've held my tongue on this because it seems a lot of commentary on the Iranian situation is people just kind of coping and hoping that they can Care Bear stare from their own respective countries a revolution into being. But point being, all of my opinions on this aside, it's clear that Reform have adopted this position on foreign policy that seeks to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, play nice with the Emiratis and the Saudis, promote the Abraham Accords, normalize relationships between the Gulf countries and Israel, support Israel. Their position on Ukraine has wavered, but they're hoping that resolves before the election is even called, so it's a non-issue. And so the domestic British Jewish community, much like Trump being the safer bet in America for lots of Jews like Bill Ackman or Barry Weiss, who feel they got mugged by reality after October 7th and saw the anti-Semitism of the left, lots of them will be trending towards Reform, and I think Robert Jenrick will have cemented that movement away from the Conservative Party. And again, let's be totally dispassionate here. I think even the most uncharitable theory that all of our politics is just the plaything of Zionist forces will say, okay, therefore that's proof that the Conservative Party are going to die. Like, from every angle that you're looking at it, the Conservative Party are dead, and Jenrick has pulled off what amounts to basically a coup for the succession, potentially, of the top spot of Reform UK, while also fending off any requirement for Reform to reconcile their attacks on him just a few days ago. Again, very interesting stuff going on. So, the other defections were not quite as widely celebrated. And this is a different point. So, Robert Jenrick's personal success and defection has gone down pretty well. They've pulled off a blinder. But this follows a series of defections that most people hated, and it looked for a while there that Reform were on a losing streak that they could not possibly recover from. Because again, personnel make a party, and if you fill your party with the failures of the uniparty, then actually, Chairman Dr. David Bull, the establishment parties are not dead. They will resurrect themselves within Reform. And if you look at these defections, I mean, most of them are Conservatives. Some of them are independents. There's one guy here from the Greens. Like, why did you take a Green Party councillor? Apparently he voted Brexit, and I don't know, he was more concerned about recycling than he was about the fact that his party is led by two third worldists. One guy who yelled Allahu Akbar, this is for Gaza, when he won his local council seat in May 2024. But Reform don't need these people. Like, they might individually be nice people, but mass defections from a party do not code as a preference cascade, and they do not code as you snapping out the best and brightest. They code as you being the next bandwagon, the life raft from which people can jump from a sinking ship and allow their own careers to continue coasting. Like, I don't think any of these people, correct me if I'm wrong, they could all be very nice, I don't think any of these people are irreplaceable. They're not vital talent that Reform could not have done without. So instead, your base just sees the celebration of these defections as you're morphing into the very thing that you sought to destroy. And so this is why, when they posted this, monitoring the situation, whoever the social media guy is that was running this account, I don't know if you're watching the show, I'm sorry that I made your job harder, but the ratio speaks for itself. I mean, myself, Charlie Downs, like, we're saying, who is Reform even for? Becoming Conservative refugee camp isn't the flex you think it is. This is why Farage had to come out today during both press conferences and reassure the base, because he saw the frustration in the comments. this went down really badly. People don't want mass defections from the Uniparty because a party is not just the branding, it's comprised of the people that make the decisions and propose the policy and execute on the mandate. And if those people aren't on board with the mission, if they have just annexed themselves from the parties responsible for the decline, if they are themselves the people responsible for the decline, then they won't have learned their lessons and they will just mismanage the country again. It's going to be very frustrating. And so the backlash to this was immense. This is the Green Party guy, by the way. I mean, God knows why he was so necessary. But this wasn't the worst defection. The worst defection was Nadim Zahawi. Now, if you don't know, Nadim Zahawi, the boy from Baghdad, was one of the diversity intake under David Cameron. I believe he's a Muslim. I don't know if he's practicing, but he's certainly a sort of cultural Muslim. And he did a video during the vaccine rollout because he was vaccine minister during COVID, thanking the Muslim community for how dedicated they've been for installing vaccination centres in mosques. Nadim Zahawi, again, vaccine minister, education minister, briefly chancellor, and then was the Conservative Party chairman until he had to resign because The Guardian revealed that he had a tax scandal with HMRC and had to pay back about £5 million in unpaid taxes and penalties, while he was chancellor, by the way. So, total failure, excused and presided over the Boris wave, never resigned, unrepentant, still in favour of mass migration, according to his record, total political opportunist, emblematic of the failures of the last 14 years of Conservative government. And Reform celebrated his defection. In fact, I don't know if they've changed it. They have. Right. Yesterday, Reform had their banner, an image of Nigel Farage smiling and embracing, standing next to Nadim Zahawi. So it's been nothing but jubilant about the fact that one of the architects of the Boris wave, and I don't care about tax evasion, but someone putting our taxes up and then evading it's pretty insulting. And the man, by the way, who founded YouGov. YouGov was used as the polling propaganda arm of the Conservative government during COVID lockdowns. So was manufacturing consent for locking us in our homes and forcing a vaccination mandate on us via vaccine passports, which he voted for and helped pass and excuse. They celebrated his admission into the party. And Nadim was very prickly when he was questioned on this, because again, the announcement went down like a brick on a duck pond. But there was reason to question it, because Reform HQ and their vetting procedures forgot to tell him to delete a bunch of his tweets regarding Nigel Farage. And so people dug these up when he announced his defection. For example, in 2014, he said, "No chance, I've been a Conservative all my life and I'll die a Conservative." 2015, Farage has run for political office 6 times and been an MEP for 15 years. He's as establishment as they come. And also in 2015, "I'm not British born, Mr. Farage. I'm as British as you are. Your comments are offensive and racist. I would be frightened to live in a country run by you." You're right, he's not British born. He's born over when he's 9 and didn't speak English for quite some time. So he's, very impressive businessman. I'm not taking away from that. But no, Nadim, you're not as British as me. You're an Iraqi Kurd. You're a Muslim. You got British citizenship because your parents brought you over here. You don't get to lecture to me about my ancestry and my identity. I don't consider you a competent politician, respectable, one of my countrymen or my kin. I consider you an architect of our immiseration. I don't think you should be allowed to hold office because you are an immigrant. I think just based on rules, that should bar you. But I also don't think you should be anywhere near politics, particularly the political vehicle that is dedicated to cleaning up the mess that you made. So it's very frustrating that Reform have let him in. And so this left a very sour taste in people's mouths leading up to the Jenrick defection. And when the Conservatives were able to dunk on this defection by posting Nadim's old tweets, you know that you screwed up. So, in fact, the Uno reverse card played by Robert Jenrick today, seizing back control of the narrative because Kemi Badenoch just blundered a blinder, is even more impressive. But anyway, I'm not here to fillet Robert Jenrick. Just we should learn our lessons from today's political manoeuvring in how to control the narrative. That's all I'm saying. Make the enemy fight on your terms. Now, to be fair, Nigel Farage had some coarse words as well for Nadim Zahawi back in 2022. I think this was him zooming into Dan Wootton's show at the time, saying, "I thought Nadim Zahawi had principles. Tonight we learn he's just about climbing that greasy pole." Turns out he's still about climbing that greasy pole. And then when Nadim was questioned about things like his record on the COVID vaccine, he became very abrasive, very defensive. And so this meant that the press conference went down even worse with Reform's base. I'll just play this brief clip with a journalist asking him about it.
Mrs. Zahawi, on this point about COVID vaccines, I hear the point about free speech, but the doctor previously mentioned told Reform's conference that the vaccines that you rolled out may have caused the King's cancer. And he was described by David Bull as someone who worked with him to write Reform's health policy. So do you reject those views? And if they have shaped Reform's health policy, will you try to change it?
I think you'll find David Bull actually spoke about vaccines on Friday night at our event that we held down at the Excel Centre with just shy of 3,000 people launching our London campaign. And I think you'll find, if you look at what Dr. David Bull, our chairman, said, how proud he was of the work, actually for centuries, that London had done and led the way in with vaccines. And as Nadeem said previously, you know, we get all sorts of speakers from all over the world, some of whom have different opinions.
Can I just come in, Tony?
Please.
I expected more from you, right? That was a really stupid question, right? And it doesn't even deserve an answer. So try again next time.
One more time with a stupid question. Did you seek any assurances from Mr. Farage or anyone else about Reform's policy on vaccines before you joined?
Right, let me take that again. I still think it's a stupid question, and I'll tell you for why. I know you want to persist on this because you just heard from the leader of the Reform Party that David Bull spoke about this and was very clear on this, and you're still going on about, you know, were vaccines efficacious or not. I would not be sitting here, nor would Nigel be sitting next to me, if we didn't agree that we did the right thing for the nation to get the vaccine programme to the success that it achieved, the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, if not in the world. And so that is why I think it's a stupid question.
He would not be sitting next to Nigel if Nigel didn't agree. Now, Nigel had actually proposed putting our political differences aside and appointing Tony Blair, the vaccine czar, during the COVID lockdown, so Nigel has a pretty poor record on COVID. He even supported the first lockdown, though not the second or third. But Nadeem Zahawi insinuates that Nigel Farage agreed with him on every measure. Now, I don't think that's the case. I think Nigel would, if pressed, retreat from things like COVID passports, which he spoke out against at the time. But don't forget, that was part of the vaccine rollout, including Boris Johnson insinuating in December of 2021, I think it was the 5th of December, during a live press conference, that he would make the vaccine mandatory. We should have a national conversation about it. Okay, conversation over. No. But Nadeem Zahawi insinuates that those views are fine in Reform. I mean, of course, David Bull and Richard Tice had previously said they were in favour of compulsory vaccination, especially for children. So this kind of conflicts with Reform's pledge to do a public investigation into vaccine harms. Though, of course, Reform has already promised, you know, private prosecutions and public investigations into the grooming gang scandal, which haven't materialised, so who knows if that will actually go ahead. We hope it does. But as Bernie reminds us here, Nadeem Zahawi just lied live on television on the BBC, back when he was vaccines minister, and insisted that COVID passports were not how we did things in Britain and were never going to come to pass. Just a refresher.
The Prime Minister of Greece has said that he would welcome people to come on holiday in Greece, but they will have to have some kind of vaccine passport to show they've been vaccinated first. Is that something that the British government is looking at, the idea of a vaccine passport specifically to allow people to come and go in the months ahead?
No, we're not. And there are several reasons why we're not doing that. One, vaccines are not mandated in this country, as Boris Johnson's quite rightly reminded Parliament. You know, that's not how we do things in the UK. We do them by consent. We yet don't know what the impact of vaccines on transmission is, and it would be discriminatory. Of course, you have the evidence that you've been vaccinated held by your GP, and if other countries require you to show proof of that evidence, then that is obviously up to those countries. But we've vaccinated, or we've given the first dose to 11.5 million people, and we have no plan of introducing a vaccine passport.
But then, in the House of Commons,
this week, after a successful trial, we have rolled out the NHS COVID pass. This allows people safely and securely to demonstrate their COVID status, whether it's proof of vaccination status, test results, or natural immunity.
So, straight up lied. Said they wouldn't be introduced, then excused introducing them anyway. He said, they're not what I believe in, but they're right. Incoherent, dishonest, opportunistic, untrustworthy. No thanks. And then, of course, he voted for them on the 14th of December 2021. There he is, along with all the other Conservatives that voted for it. Some who have now tried to pay penance, of course. I mean, if I were a cabinet minister then, I would rather resign than vote along with collective responsibility, but I don't think anything the Conservative government did during lockdown was excusable, so there you go. No use rehabilitating the reputation. So, okay, so he got COVID wrong. He's really rude. He's unrepentant. He thinks everything that was to do with the vaccine rollout was just tickety-boo. We can't even question that on YouTube. But why was he admitted into the party anyway? So, Nigel Farage cited his time as Conservative chairman and his ability to raise funds, as well as his business interests in Dubai, as the reason why Nadhim Zahawi has been brought into the fold. And so this comes back to the interest in foreign affairs, in attracting foreign investment. Bear in mind, Nigel Farage recently took a all-expenses-paid trip to Dubai. I think it was for watching the Grand Prix, and it was paid for by the Emiratis, I believe. So guest of honour, there are lots of business interests coming from Dubai. I mean, Isabel Oakeshott lives out in Dubai at the moment, while also being Talks senior political editor, while also being engaged to Richard Tice, and that for some reason isn't a conflict of interest. But yet again, Jeremy Kyle is also providing media training to Reform's candidates, and only disclosed that on air the other day. So the entire media money, power, and excess is involved in pushing Reform and certain figures in Reform, of course. And it is to Reform's benefit, apparently, that Nadhim Zahawi, with his international connections, the business that he's done in the Middle East, whether that's Qatar, and he wouldn't be the only person, apparently, doing business with the Qataris in Reform, whether that's Dubai, the Emiratis, wherever. Apparently that's the reason why he is such a steal, a high-profile poach for Reform. But if you don't know about some of the background of Nadhim Zahawi, helpfully, The Guardian, which I usually hate, has some prompts here. So, he was born in Iraqi Kurdistan. He was brought to England in 1978 when his family had fled from Saddam Hussein's regime. Apparently, his dad was on Iraqi banknotes, so that's how senior they were in the pre-Ba'athist political order. He served for 12 years as a borough councillor in Wandsworth and worked for Conservative MP, the disgraced Geoffrey Archer, and advised him during his London mayor bid in 1999. So, not exactly a stellar political record, because 2 years later, Archer was jailed for being convicted for perjury and perverting the course of justice. He then founded YouGov with fellow Conservative Stephen Shakespeare in 2000, which gave the wonderful Liberal hall monitor Freddie Sayers his start as a political editor over at YouGov. He then became an MP as part of Cameron's diversity initiative. He was Education Minister under Theresa May in 2018, Vaccine Minister in Boris Johnson's cabinet. He was then Chancellor, then Education Secretary, then Conservative Party Chairman, and he was then investigated by HMRC in April of 2021, held face-to-face investigations with the taxman and investigators in June 2021 while he was a business minister, and then while he was Chancellor, he arranged a repayment settlement with HMRC of £4.8 million. That was £3.7 million in overdue taxes and a 30% penalty. And so, this is the reason, apparently, that Nigel Farage thinks he's an asset, but it's also the reason that he left the Conservative Party, because apparently he asked to be made a peer by Kemi Badenoch, and he made multiple approaches in late 2024, and because of the tax issue, he was told, under no uncertain terms, you're not getting a peerage. So he just clearly went to where he thinks the next party of government is going to be, and thought that he might be getting a place in the House of Lords, because, of course, Reform UK will have their manifesto commitments blocked by the Lords if they're not in their manifesto, and because the Lords is stacked in favour of the Lib Dems and Labour and Tories. So, I know for a fact, there are lots of people staying quiet on their criticisms of Reform, some very prominent names in British alternative media, and they go on TV a lot, because they're hoping for a peerage. They are frustrated with Reform's lack of action on Islam and demographics, but they always keep a careful distance with their criticism from the party so that they can be conferred patronage for staying quiet and being loyal. I just don't think that gets us the party we need, I'm afraid. I'm always happy to lose out on hypothetical opportunities, or, the safe seat that I don't want, or the column in the Telegraph, or being made a lord in my 40s or something. to make sure that we apply the necessary amount of pressure on politicians to actually get the things that we want. For example, you know, me and Stephen Edgington forcing the issue of mass deportations at Reform Conference and in interviews, and hey presto, you know, that's been made mainstream. So turns out we can actually do things. But lots of people are unwilling to do that because they think it will jeopardise their comfy extra £20,000 a year stipend and their ability to give speeches in big red robes. And it seems that Nadim Zahawi was denied that privilege by the Conservative Party, by Kemi Badenoch, and so has crossed the floor to Reform UK, where he thinks he might get it instead. Now, what are Nadim Zahawi's views on the main issues of Reform UK? Well, he was pro-net zero, but people can change their mind on that, right? I think he took oil money at one point, so clearly he's not that bothered about the green energy racket. What does he think on immigration? In 2013, he said that the Tories should grant illegal immigrants amnesty, blanket amnesty. He actually said the reason he said this was because it could help repair the Tories' tarnished reputation among minority voters. We shouldn't be afraid to think outside our comfort zone, he said. At the last election, the Tories picked up 16% of the black and Asian vote, while more than two-thirds supported Labour. Our failure to appeal to ethnic minority voters should send loud alarm bells ringing in Downing Street and Central Office. Unless we act now, this electoral penalty would only get worse. Right, it was this mentality that put Rishi Sunak as the leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister and Chancellor. It was this mentality that allowed this man to get cabinet positions, that made Priti Patel the Home Office, Home Secretary who administered the Boris wave, and that made Kemi Badenoch now the disastrous leader of the Conservative Party. This consistent pandering to imported client groups that the native population didn't want here in the first place, who will not reproduce our civilization, and said pandering encompassing rewarding criminals for breaking into our country, that shouldn't be welcome in reform. And he hasn't demonstrated any contrition for having pushed this disastrous and immoral opinion. And as was recently clipped and uncovered by Basil the Great, good aggregator account, he did an Oxford Union speech. I don't know where my footage is, by the way. I'm still waiting on it to come out. Dreadfully slow over there. He argued against Douglas Murray, who we'll bring out later, in favour of immigration, and his argument for immigration boiled down to, if Somalians can't defraud the British taxpayer with social housing and benefits, then they can't send it back in remittances, and the Somali economy, full of low IQ cousin marrying layabouts in a failed state, will just collapse. And so you either have to import them all so they can send it back in remittances, or we have to take your tax money and send it in foreign aid there instead, giving us the Hobson's choice that gets demographic replacement and or all of your money sent to the third world. Let's listen to his compelling case.
The UK remits more than £2 billion overseas every year. Some of the poorest economies, like Somalia, are entirely dependent on money remitted by the Somali diaspora. Unlike official aid, remittances between family can't be embezzled or misspent by corrupt regimes. So significant cuts to immigration would cut off a major financial lifeline to the world's poorest, resulting in stronger demand for government aid.
Who cares? I want to see the Somalian economy collapse, actually. I think that, frankly, if they can't make it on their own, they deserve to live in the squalor that their culture and their behaviour results in. I think if you are insistent on abhorrent practices and stupid beliefs, then you get the nothing that you deserve. And no, I don't think that their demand for my money means I have to give it to them. We can just say no, and we should. I think, didn't Rupert Lowe respond to this? Yeah, I don't give a shit about the Somalian economy. Patriot. We'll get on to Rupert in a bit. And again, he continues to make all the arguments. He says that our economy is going to be the most successful. It's going to surpass Germany because of our young and vibrant migrant population. Of course, diversity being our strength. And if you don't give mass amnesty to illegals and let infinite foreigners in, then you're a racist. And then he also said that immigrants actually are net contributors and they work harder than British natives, and that's why Douglas Murray, in the debate, was wrong. Actually, thanks to him, that's not true. Thanks to the Boris wave that he supported and presided over, 95% of all immigrants are net tax detriments because they come from the third world. It turns out that not every single person is an interchangeable, fungible widget with the same IQ, work ethic, family structure, culture, habits. It turns out that there are vast differences between groups, and we should set our immigration and remigration policy according to those group differences. I think we should be discriminate. We should discriminate based on content of character, of course, rather than colour of skin. It just so happens that entire countries' contents of characters are found wanting. Like Somalia. Ask Minnesota taxpayers if they feel particularly enriched by Somalian immigration. Nadim. And then, when he was education minister, this is a particular annoyance for me, and it'll be an annoyance for a bunch of people in my audience. It's a niche concern. But Nadim Zahawi acted as if the state owned your children, because when he was education minister, briefly, he wanted to create a national register of homeschooled students and have Ofsted visit homes and police your parenting. And of course, this is only a problem because of the diversification of the population that Nadim Zahawi has encouraged, and there are going to be some students who don't go to school, barely speak English, don't integrate into British values, and who are disproportionately abused at home, particularly girls in Muslim households. But instead of stop those people from coming here, the Leviathan state has to now take ownership of your children if you are a well-educated, peaceful parenting Christian who hates the perversion and inattentiveness of the modern school system and doesn't want your child subjected to drag queen story hours, so you want to homeschool. He wanted to make that borderline impossible with punitive household checks by the government and to force your children, like you do in Germany, to go to state-funded schools if they didn't like what they were teaching you. This is the guy, again, that Reform has just celebrated as a defection, and so it was understandable that Farage had to ease the anxieties of his base when Robert Jenrick was going to jump ship, because everyone was pissed about this. And then, of course, he celebrated the Online Safety Act, intent on defending children by, censoring my Substack. Thanks, Nadim. Oh, and by the way, he supported BLM. The agitators and criminals are using BLM, abusing BLM. They want BLM to fail so they can say, "We told you so." It is incumbent upon us all to unite, black and brown and white, in support and BLM and call out the criminals. Supporting literal race communists. Like, fair play to Nigel Farage. He called out them for the grifters and anti-white racists that they are. So why admit this guy? Again, none of this gets brought up, and so people are frustrated that Reform is starting to look like a landing pad for yesterday's Tory party. And it's just not good enough, I'm afraid. It's people don't want this. Now, of course, the sales pitch from someone like Isabel Oakeshott was that he has a huge amount of government experience. He has business interests in Dubai. He has all these international connections. Sorry, I don't particularly care. I don't care whether or not he builds up your relative faction power within the party. I don't care if he spent a long time as a cabinet minister because he was clearly too incompetent to actually do anything, or he was sat around the table with Rishi Sunak laughing at the fact that policies were being proposed that were never going to succeed. I don't care whether or not he can make lots and lots of money in Dubai. Personally, I think he should piss off there. I don't think he should be allowed to be in British politics. He clearly doesn't demonstrate a deference to the native people of this country. He wants to flood us full of resentful third worlders and turn us into a piggy bank for the failed states in the Horn of Africa. If he likes Dubai so much, wants to make so much money out there, I think we should strip him of his British citizenship and send him out there rather than empower him to be in Reform, which is, rhetoric, which is why I'm banned from going to Reform events. Surely, but I think a lot of Reform's voter base feel that way, and that's why they still liaise with me and still watch my stuff. It's just that they think that Reform is necessary to do all this stuff. So the sales pitch didn't go over well from Isabel Oakeshott. It was very desperate. I mean, she celebrated it, saying, a big coup for Nigel Farage, who's next? Bear in mind, in 2023, during the whole tax scandal, she said that Nadim Zahawi is toxic for the Tory leadership. All that talk of levelling up is a complete nonsense when cabinet ministers attempt to worm their way out of multi-million-pound tax bills. Curious. There's a reason that Nigel Farage doesn't like Isabel Oakeshott. Number one, she tried to personally veto people that Nigel Farage wanted to appoint as candidates back when Richard Tice was running Reform, and Nigel Farage was just honorary chairman with no actual power. And then for Nigel Farage's 60th birthday party, he invited Richard Tice, but not Isabel Oakeshott, despite them being together. Can't stand her. Lots of people can't stand her. They call her the Ice Queen. Someone in Reform actually dated her at one point, so it's kind of awkward for them to interact now, but he just said, she's insufferable. I just can't deal with her. Anyway, so she actually went on, did the sort of apology tour on Kevin O'Sullivan's show on Talk, doing a, you know, undeclared advert for the party, and even Kevin brought up the fact that he had just defected to Reform because he was denied a Tory peerage, and she stammered and said, well, that's just speculation. Because it's undoubted that she helped facilitate the defection, which is why she's trumpeting it, and now has egg on her face because it's backfired because the entire base hated it. Like, sorry, you just shouldn't have gone through with it if you didn't want it. And as Wolf points out, here, Wolf's a good account, you should follow him. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's very gracious about amplifying my work, and he frequently clips my stuff. So if he's watching, thank you very much. Wolf, you're free to clip farm all these insights if you like, as are all of you, because I'm too lazy to do it, frankly. But as you pointed out, the answer here is that he was inundated for his money, and also the fact that, yet again, when he was sat by Nigel Farage, when he was asked, are you bothered by Farage's alleged racist comments, he said, Reform's not a racist party, they've never been a racist party, I wouldn't be sitting next to him if he wasn't racist. Is yet again the Layla Cunningham's use of effect of, we need a immigrant, a Muslim, to sit next to us and cleanse us of all of our alleged transgressions against progressive morality. We need progressive body armor, basically, to make it in the political scene. And when Dan Wootton pointed this out, he and Isabel Oakeshott had a furious war of words over Twitter, where she made it very personal and brought up the fact that she had tried to help and console Dan after mendacious allegations were made about him by the Byline Times. And Dan Wootton then actually broke the news on his show, saying that these were texts between Richard Tyson and Howard Cox, ousting him for supporting Tommy Robinson. But he alleged that Isabel and Tice had actually asked Dan to work for Reform UK, and he refused. And then after he had taken Rupert Lowe's side, when Richard Tice had suggested on GB News that Rupert Lowe had dementia, which is disgusting, Richard Tice apparently sent him a WhatsApp saying he had declared war on Dan Wootton outspoken. So there is a lot. Again, the faction wars are very fraught, and there are a lot of vested interests in promoting select candidates and building up their power base within Reform, which, and the reason I'm saying all this, which explains all the Tory defections. It's this desperation to be seen as approved by the mainstream. It's this desperation to not be called racist. But also individual actors are competing to poach outside figures to build up their own personal power base within the party to then vie for the top spots in cabinet when the government win the next election. So this didn't go down well with the Reform base. I'll wrap this up with some analysis soon, because I don't want to keep my wife waiting for dinner for too long, and I've got to address some of your super chats. But of course, they were trying to sell this, and this is the reason why Reform had to calm everyone's nerves today, is because multiple callers went into Talk and voiced their displeasure. For example, this chap who called into Julia Hartley-Brewis.
What do you make of it? A good thing or a bad thing?
Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
Well, thanks for calling.
I'm an ex-Conservative Party member from last year.
Yeah.
I gave up my membership of the Conservative Party and joined Reform.
Yeah.
And I like to tell Reform and Nigel Farage, I'm not going to vote for any ex-Tory that he puts in my
Hold on a minute. It's okay for you as an ex-Tory voter to go to Reform, but it's not okay for an ex-Tory MP to go to Reform. How do you work that out?
Because I wasn't a member of the government that got us in this trouble of where we are now.
Uh-huh.
That's why it's all right for me as a voter to go, but not them.
So unless there's evidence that they stood up and campaigned against some of the crucial things. See, I would say someone like Steve Baker, again. I would say Craig McKinley. I would say Doug Smith. People who were on the right side of history on censorship, on vaccines, on immigration, on net zero. You name it. They were speaking out and being honest, criticising the government. Standing up to them, trying to actually take action to improve, to help us, the people. I mean, would you welcome any of them?
Well, probably not. I mean, you found a couple there, fair play to you. But as far as I'm concerned, the rest of them, most, if not 99% of them, are fake Tories and closet Lib Dems. The whole bunch of them.
And what do you think is the key difference between a Tory and a Reform MP? What are the key issues? What are the key views that would mean you'd say this person isn't for me?
I think Reform, from what I've seen of them, are promising that they're going to do something about immigration. Yeah. Now, if they get in and don't, they'll be in the same position that the Conservative Party are now.
Yeah, we don't want Steve Baker, by the way. He wasn't right on immigration. He was trying to appease the sizable Pakistani constituency community in his constituency by not talking about immigration. By the way, he was right on lockdown on economics, but he's still a delusional liberal. But as you can see, Julia, and I like Julia. Don't get me wrong. I think I've been cancelled from talk because I haven't received an invite since Private Eye's campaign to have me blacklisted. I should probably text a producer about that. I've certainly been banned from GB News because they still haven't released my now almost 2-month-old interview with Steve Edgington after Stella Creasy's campaign to get me banned from there. So unfortunate, you know, you get banned from everywhere from saying the truth. You're vindicated, but never receive an apology. But the idea that he can't switch his party allegiance when that's all that's on offer, but then opportunistic politicians that were members of the last government can then jump ship and act like nothing was wrong, yeah, not going to wash. But the best clip of this was the interaction between David Bull and Jeremy Kyle. Jeremy Kyle, again, doing media training for Reform. Someone called in and said, why are you taking every Muslim and Conservative when the party was meant to be a party representing British natives? And this one was just gold.
Michael on Nadine, good morning.
Morning, Jez. Great show. It's Michael from Corby here. Just dropping a note in on the point of Tories defecting to Reform. Reform was supposed to be a party of British people, for the British people, putting our needs first. They've imported every Muslim from the Tory party whose only interest is the Muslim community. Therefore, Reform will be no better than the Tories or Labour, and they won't get my vote. We need a party that's going to put British people first for once. Have a great one, mate. Thank you.
Can I just make the point? They are British. So Zia is British. Layla is British. Nadeem is British. So I don't buy that in any sense. Look, the whole point is that anyone who comes to our party has to subscribe to our values. If they don't believe, and if they're not on the same page as me and Nigel and the rest of us, then they are not welcome in the party. And it's...
That same page would be David Bull saying we were a nation of immigrants, we're an island of immigrants, Britain was built by immigration, that trans-identifying men should go into women's prisons, that the death penalty is immoral, and he, like, crashed out at me on breakfast TV over that. And, of course, that Islam is not a problem, because he kept screwing up his face, despite being a gay man himself, at the suggestion that they're too full of Muslims in a party that's meant to represent the anti-immigration sentiment, which is most pronounced among the fact that 53% of the British public right now, is only going to grow and get worse, think that you cannot be Muslim and be British. It's incompatible. So, no, as well, if you have to say this person is British, they're not. If you have to convince me that they're British, they're not. Zia Yusuf is a Sri Lankan Muslim. Layla Cunningham is an Egyptian Muslim. Nadim Zahawi is a Iraqi Kurd, possibly Muslim. I don't think any of these people represent me. They don't share my ethnicity, my identity, my religion. And when David Bull says you have to subscribe to our values, there is no set of values that can encompass Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, and the customs, heritage, and practices of people from the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent and the British Isles. Doesn't exist. What you're saying is they all have to defer to coexisting as a kind of goop within a liberal container. And this is a total fallacy that is engaged in by many of Reform's senior folks. Not least of all, by the way, Layla Cunningham and Gawain Towler. Now, what we've been going through here, I think, is the stages of grief over the various Reform defections that weren't Robert Jenrick. So you had, what was it? Denial, anger from David Bull. Now you've got bargaining. This is the leader of Kent County Council. This is Lyndon Kem Karan. This is the same woman who is, for cost-cutting purposes, getting rid of really nice lampposts that could just function if you changed the bulbs and painted them, while also insisting that you can't send home social care workers from the Boris wave because we need them. Indian, by the way. And she decided to compare people complaining about the defections to those who expect a woman to be a virgin on her wedding night. Much like politics being based on principles rather than corrupt patronage networks and opportunism, I think civilization worked better when actually, most women were virgins on their wedding night. Like, the fact that that's not the norm now is not good. And don't get me wrong, you know, there were plenty of shotgun weddings that happened where people were pressured to get married in order to have a stable home to raise their children, and they were happily married and they had great households. Happened to one of my grandparents. Here's a story I hope my nan doesn't mind me telling, because she does watch my show. As does my dad. But so we had the funeral for my granddad on Monday. That's why I had a bit of a strange week. I've been a bit absent for a few days. But he met my nan, and my nan said when he asked her out that she was washing her hair, and he must have been very persuasive, because after she turned him down, you know, they went on a few dates, and he must have been really persuasive, because about 6 months later they were married, and about 5 months after that their first child was born. And they were married for 58 years. So, you know, you can have those situations. So, to stretch the analogy, it's not like you can't have acrimony between people from previous parties and previous governments who then learn their lesson and come humble to the new party. See Robert Jenrick. But in the case of Nadim Zahawi, I think it's better waiting for a bride who doesn't have the body count of Lily Phillips. Just a polite suggestion. And speaking of bargaining, so there was quite the reaction to my video on Layla Cunningham and my posts, because my posts got an inordinate amount of attention. Basically saying that Layla Cunningham is an unprincipled grifter. And I didn't take the tactic that my friend Dan Wootton did, saying that she's an Islamist. Not least of all because I think the phrase Islamist has no potency, because you can't distinguish moderate Muslims from just Islam itself. What you're saying by trying to distinguish Islamists from just hypothetical moderate Muslims is we hope they don't read their texts too carefully and take seriously the idea that the illiterate Prophet Muhammad recited perfect words given to him by the angel Gabriel as written by Allah on a stone tablet at the dawn of time, meaning that all events that have ever happened and will ever happen are predetermined, and the entire history of the world exists in paradise. If they don't take that bit too seriously, then they're not actually proper Muslims, because that's like a central truth. That's as central as the resurrection of Jesus Christ is to Christianity. So, I'm sorry, but hoping that Muslims just don't read their own text too carefully is not a bet that I'm prepared to make for the continuity of my civilization. But anyway, the argument that I made, I think she's just an opportunistic grifter that's taken every position under the sun. Like, she was a conservative, she was posting pro-diversity poetry, she went on pride marches, she's now hosting iftars as a Conservative councillor. She was going to be a Conservative candidate in Rotherham, despite apparently being a lifelong Londoner and now running to be London mayor. She wears her Muslim identity on her sleeve, so to speak, but is also kind of evasive about it. I don't think she has a core position other than just saying whatever she needs to as a password to gain access to power. I think she's a grifter. Well, the cope and bargaining kept flowing about these consistent backlashes to Nadim Zahawi and the mass council of defections, and even Layla Cunningham, from the likes of Gawain Towler. Now, you might be familiar with Gawain Towler, because Gawain Towler was Nigel's confidant, I would say, his sort of most reliable right-hand man. For many years, during UKIP and the Brexit Party, and even at the Clacton launch of Reform's candidacy for Nigel Farage to be an MP, he was the guy who had the speaker box on his head while Nigel was giving his first speech. And you may remember Gawain Towler because Gawain also was the man who spoke to Hope Not Hate via Dan Hodges at the Mail in 2014 and had Hope Not Hate vet UKIP's candidates and deselect them. And Gawain, from conversations I've had with Gawain, I don't wish to be mean because he's a very nice chap. He's one of my favourite characters in politics. I just think he's wrong on lots of things. But you know, he's like an eccentric a familiar face. From my conversations with Gawain, he truly sees the far right as the real enemy. And so this is why he was so willing to work with Hope Not Hate to vet his candidates, because he thought that, you know, anything to the right of British value civic nationalism would scupper his chances electorally. And so, Gawain has now explained the governing philosophy of reform and made the case for Layla Cunningham in two substacks, which are, I'm sorry, just dreadful. So, he explains, the online ethno-right brigade has erupted like a bad case of indigestion, hurling abuse at Layla Cunningham simply because of her faith. Yes, because she doesn't believe anything I believe. It's not simply because, like, it turns out that just like I wouldn't want a communist mayor of London, like the one we've got now, I won't want a Muslim mayor of London, because we don't agree on a doctrine of good and evil, on right and wrong, on the moral law, on common law, on death, and the afterlife, on whether or not each individual human being has inviolable dignity if they are innocent imparted upon them via the principle of Imago Dei, on whether or not morality is individualistic or clannish, on whether or not you can lie to people of other faiths, or if honesty is itself an axiomatic good, you're compelled to not bear false witness, on whether or not you should confer advantages on your family, your clan, and your Ummah. All these things actually matter, Gawain, and they're not just incidental things that you can compartmentalize, like, you know, changing a t-shirt. Anyway, Gawain says, let's be clear. Layla embodies the exact kind of moderate integrated Brit we need more of. A shining example of what I call an Anglican Muslim. Private faith, public service, no demands for special treatment. If we're serious about reclaiming Britain, we ought to be cheering her on, not chucking stones. Right. It could well be that Layla Cunningham doesn't go to mosque on Fridays and drinks, because her husband is American, not English. Her second husband, I believe, and he's a Christian. So it could just be she's not as observant. It's a sort of a cultural thing. I know someone like this, you know, daughter of Moroccan Muslims, who does drink and isn't religiously observant, and it's kind of like a cultural LARP. That will not recreate our civilization, even if practiced peacefully. And guess what? Cameron's Conservative Party spent a long time amplifying the moderate Muslims, hoping to basically Care Bear stare a Enlightenment-style reformation within Islam, with a kind of government-approved liberal version of Islam. Didn't work. What ended up happening is mass Muslim migration and the complete capture of the Home Office by the Islamic network, with the stewards of the Prevent team having their brother and friends join ISIS. So it turns out that those moderate Muslims, like Saida Vorsi, we have to say inadvertently here, because she's litigious, held the door open for Muslim groups that she herself said, although not illegal, are definitely illiberal, like Mend and Cage. And, as William Shawcross said, Hizb ut-Tahrir, even, the now prescribed group. So it turns out that Anglican Muslims are not a thing. And as I put to Gawain on Twitter, by Anglican you mean liberal. He disputed that, but we'll see in a moment. He says, he said he wasn't taking aim at me here, but it sounds like it. He says, don't get me started on the conspiracy theorists accusing her of being a grifter who jumped from the Tories for reform to fame. Poppycock, Layla's defected because the Conservatives are a spent force, riddled with the same establishment rot that's plagued us for decades. She's not in it for selfies at Pride or iftar dinners, though she's done both, showing she's at ease in modern Britain without forcing it down throats. Right, so what modern Britain is a series of like buffet dinners and random costumes with literally no consequence or coherence. You can go to Pride one day, you can go to an iftar dinner the other, you can kind of be Christian or Buddhist or communist, just wear whatever cultural costume, whatever religion, whatever definition of metaphysics, whether or not men and women even exist, you can wear it from one day or the other, and we've got no requirement for you to be consistent or for us to actually know what the fuck you believe in order to vote for you. What? This is one of the most incoherent... Again, I don't want to be a dick to Gawain. I don't. He's a nice chap. He's always very polite to me. This is one of the most incoherent, poor arguments ever. And this is the argument that Reform are basically making with the presence of Layla Cunningham and Zia Yusuf and now Nadim Zahawi. It's just that we all basically want the same thing. Our differences in heritage and history and identity and religion, and even if we go to pride marches in the party that apparently is in favour of protecting women's safe spaces and opposed to puberty blockers, apparently all of that's inconsequential. All we need to talk about is taxes and crime. Sorry, that's just not going to happen. That's not how you produce a civilization. You can't decouple the culture from the people. You can't replace the people, and you can't ignore the culture, because all of those provide givens upon which economics and criminal justice and environmental policy and all that rest. That creates a stable foundation for a civilization, Gawain. And so, the following argument, he says, here's where I want to dig deeper. Layla's selection is more than party politics. It's a litmus test for how we handle faith in the country. No, it's not. It's not a referendum on whether or not you can personally spearhead a moderate reformation in Islam. It's delusional cope. And it just shows you don't understand Islam. You don't understand the concept of asabaya. You don't understand the concept of inerrancy or abrogation or the supremacy of the sword verses over the slightly more moderate verses in Medina, if you want to say that. The hotly contested definition of jihad, which is actually just it means fighting, it means physical struggle, and even if it means internal spiritual struggle, then fitna actually leads to a permanent crusade against the physical forces of temptation. Like, you don't understand any of this. I'm sorry, Gawain is very well learned in like church history, in British history, but I think he's projecting the Protestant Reformation and the public-private distinction that developed to keep Protestants, Catholics, and Jews living together in relative peace in Europe onto Islam and onto other religions that don't share a common biblical ancestry or a common vision of people made Imago Dei. Instead, he's trying to impose it upon the 7th century morality of Biradiri clans in Arabia that often results in suicide bombings. Because here he says, the Church of England, bless its socks, has been forged in the fires of history to suit our national character. Think about it. Henry VIII's break from Rome, the Tudor tumults, the bloody Civil War, where Puritans and Cavaliers slugged it out over prayer books and pomp, then the Georgian era's laxity, the Victorian clashes between evangelical Clapham sect firebrands and the High Church Oxford movement aesthetes. Through it all, the C of E emerges a rather friendly, undemanding affair. Yeah, and look at it, it's totally capsized. The pews are empty. The Archbishop of Canterbury is a woman who declared herself to be subversive. The previous one was ejected because he spent more time declaring his support for Ramadan than he did investigating sex abuse in the church, and the one before that, Rowan Williams, was a literal communist who wrote for Searchlight. And now Catholics are outnumbering Anglicans 2-1 among under 30s, and that's mainly due to conversions and birth rates, not immigration. So, any comparison to the Anglican Church is not a compliment, Gawain. It's at best promising to the faith that you're trying to convert into Anglicanism that their faith will die out, or it's an attempt to liberalise the faith that is doomed to fail because it doesn't share the same priors that caused the Anglican faith to succumb to liberalism. And Robert Toombs does the same thing in The English and Their History, and when he suggested that the Michaela School can make Muslim girls British. He said that basically the English Civil War is akin to the battles we have over Islamism now, and it's like, no, because the faction wars between Catholics and Protestants were wars of denominations of Christianity between native peoples to the British Isles. The presence of Islam in Britain is a foreign import. It is optional. It doesn't need to be here. It shouldn't be here. And so the violence that various caliphate enthusiasts enact on Europe and Britain's streets doesn't need to be here either. It's not some period of shared social struggle where you all need to sustain to work out a kind of liberal compromise as Anglicans and Catholics eventually sort of reached until the Troubles in Ireland. We just don't need to have it at all. And so you can't make the case to the British public that it needs to happen here and that we need to have Muslim candidates in the anti-immigration party to force Muslims to be liberal and moderate. Instead, most people are just going to go, yeah, Islam doesn't belong, send it back to wherever. And that's the majority of Reform's base. This is why the majority of Reform's voters registered in a recent poll saying, no, Britain's a community of ethnicities, not of values. And said values don't even encompass Islam. We don't like Islam. We want a vast majority of legal migrants, especially Muslim migrants, to go home to wherever. So it's not a compelling case. When he says, there's a glorious lack of enthusiasm with Anglicanism, no hellfire preaching, no demands for societal overhaul based on divine diktat, just a quiet, deep faith that sustains without imposing. It's personal, unobtrusive, content to let others be. And frankly, that's what drives the radicals at the top bonkers. Its demands for enthusiasm down particular political routes is in part why so many have drifted away from the pews. Yeah, but it's not representative of British Islam. Look at the Henry Jackson Society polling that finds that 52% want to ban depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, 2/3 support Hamas, or think they did nothing wrong on October 7th. A third of them want Sharia law, and they want Islam to be the official religion of Britain, and that's most pronounced among British-born, university-educated, second-generation Muslims. So it's only getting worse, as Muhammad is the #1 baby name in the country. So Layla Cunningham is no way representative of the majority of Muslims. She doesn't even seem to have a consistent position. She's not required to, according to Gawain. And so this is folly. This is doomed to fail. And so when he's saying, it's precisely the model we need for every faith in Britain. Sikh Anglicans, Hindu Anglicans, Jewish Anglicans, and Islamic Anglicans. Private devotion, deeply felt, but not shoved in our faces or used to extract concessions. No kowtowing required. What Gawain is arguing for, as I said in my response, is the ability for the state to manage tensions between communities and confine their religious observance to the private sphere, and then treat their houses like magic portals through which they move, and when they interact in public, including in politics, somehow their deeply held religious convictions and cultural prejudices have no bearing or bias on their political decisions. And that's just deluded. It's a public-private distinction that is exclusive to Protestantism, and even then is a kind of veil of faux neutrality draped atop tribalism and deeply held convictions. You won't get an Anglican Islam because it's not a matter of arguing from the premises of Islam for a separation of mosque and state. We're not debating, as Catholics and Protestants are, over transubstantiation or apostolic succession or the divinity of the saints, or whether or not Rome is the seat of the church and provides moral guidance, if not direct political leadership. I still think there should be a degree of ethnic particularity in the ecclesiastical structure of the British Church. We should appoint our own bishops, for example. That would be a healthy compromise. But that's not what we're arguing here. We're arguing whether or not the Quran is correct when it says you should strike at the necks of unbelievers, that Jews and Christians cannot be made friends of Muslims, that Judgment Day won't come until you genocide all the Jews and force the Christians to either submit to the jizya or die, Gawain. And if you're just hoping that Muslims don't read those verses and take them seriously, then you're deluded. And so, when I said what you're basically hoping for is liberalism, this belief in the blank slate to be realised that we all want basically the same thing, and that religion is just like a cosmetic add-on that just results in iftar dinners and funny costumes. Gawain responded, "Rubbish, I in no way mean liberal, I mean understated. Very big difference. No, you do mean liberal, because you're arguing from liberal premises. Because they have to want to be understated in order to moderate their religion. And if the religion and cultural practices of cousin marriage do not mandate that understatedness, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get Anglican Islam out of either Islam or the Pakistani clans that are in our country." And so I responded at length to Gawain, and I'll wrap this up briefly before it gets ridiculous. But I said, this is the core dispute. Most people of all faith wear that lightly. He wrote that in his article. They don't. They just don't. And we shouldn't be willing to gamble our civilization on that hope. And he said, you can inhabit your mountain, I'll stay on the banks of the Gironde, the French river in the south of France. And I said, and when the tide rises, I won't drown, and I don't want my country to be submerged either. And that's the point. So Gawain learned nothing from this. And then he wrote an article saying, why are moderate Muslims moving to Reform UK? Or why they are asserting it. And I think this article, after about paragraph 5 or something, is written by AI. So it overuses the it's not this, it's that. It overuses the rule of three. There's a total absence of historical references, which Gawain is famous for peppering throughout. And those references don't return until the concluding paragraph. So if we go here, it says, moderate Muslims are drawn to reform for the exact same reasons as the rest of us. They see our party as the last chance to save the country they love. Full stop. Okay. Immediate evidence of AI. Britain isn't just a place they live. It's a home with all its quirks, freedoms, and opportunities. They've witnessed firsthand through family histories of fleeing oppression or growing up in diverse communities. Again, diverse communities. Gawain Taylor sits on the board of Reform. He is basically Reform's spokesperson. This is the language of Cameron's Conservatives, of Blair's Labour Party, of Keir Starmer. This is what the driving motivation of Reform is, and this is the excuse for having Zia Yusuf and Layla Cunningham as prominent candidates. This is the excuse for admitting Nadim Zahawi as a defector. Diverse communities. You're never going to hear this coming out of Robert Jenrick's mouth at the moment, saying Birmingham's Islam and English ethnic identity matters. He says, they know that political Islam isn't just a foreign problem, it's knocking on Britain's door, from protests that turn violent to electoral pacts that prioritise faith over flag. Okay, the British flag and the English flag features the St. George's cross. Whereas in Islam it says that when Christ returns he's going to come and break his cross, abolish the jizya and tell his followers to convert to Islam. So, incompatible. He says, these individuals aren't apologists, they're patriots. They attack Islamism because they know its dark side, the way it stifles debate, enforces conformity, and divides societies. In Reform, they find a party that shares their alarm without descending into blanket prejudice. We're not anti-Muslim, we're anti-Islamist. Big difference. Again, written by AI, clearly. Because of its emphatic, like, staccato, full stop, big difference. That's the point. But again, the distinction between Muslim and Islamist is false, Gawain. Doesn't exist. And even if practiced peacefully, Islam will not reproduce Britain. And I'm not willing to see my country go extinct just so you don't get called names. He says, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather the phantom elephant some are hallucinating. There's been fretting about a Muslim takeover of reform. Oh please, give your heads a wobble. Among the 18 former MPs who've joined us, only one is a moderate Muslim. Out of our 60 to 70 staff members across the office and country, I can count maybe 2. The party is a mosaic. Christians, atheists, Hindus, Jews, people of all sexualities, genders. So, what, have you got a transgender representative working at Reform now? And ages. It looks like modern Britain because it is modern Britain, diverse, dynamic, and united not by identity politics, but by a shared mission to serve and save our nation from the wreckage left by successive Conservative and now Labour governments. Well, number one, you've taken in loads of Conservative defectors, you're about to take in a Labour defector. But number two, that is rhetoric from David Cameron, from Tony Blair, from Gordon Brown, from Theresa May, from Boris Johnson, from Rishi Sunak, from Keir Starmer. If I told you that was a line from a Starmer speech, you'd believe me. This is the central idea that animates reform. It is a rehabilitation of liberalism. It's just hoping we can give it one last try. It's if we empower the moderate Muslims, surely there will be no more sectarian conflict in Britain. We won't even need to deport them all. They'll all just be as British as you and me. Delusional. Absolutely delusional. Like, Gwaine still thinks John Lennon's Imagine is possible. It's just that the left under Blair and the Conservatives have gone the wrong way about implementing it. I'm sorry. Just won't happen. And he doubled down on this. He says, this is radical Islam's way of trying to dominate the whole of the faith. Moderate Islam, secular Islam, needs its role models. No such thing. Also, secular Islam. Secular Islam. What a ridiculous contradiction in terms. Okay. Again. Insane. Whereas, Greta Douglas Murray. So lots of people won't like Douglas Murray's foreign policy prescriptions. But Douglas had a very different reaction to Layla Cunningham. He noted, perhaps it is inevitable that if Reform fielded a ruddy-faced white man as their candidate for mayor of our wonderfully diverse capital, then it would be just too easy to dismiss him. It does make a certain kind of aha type of logic to think, you have a Muslim man, we will raise you a Muslim woman. Let's see how you get around that one, lefties. Except that, as mentioned above, the left can get around anything they want to, and meanwhile another problem starts to come along. For example, the problem that he notes of Zia Yusuf should be careful not to get too high on his own supply, as he spent the last week trying to accuse Rachel Reeves of racism. It might have said to have been exacerbated this week by the defection of Nadim Zahawi to Reform. Zahawi is not a stranger to political inconsistency, but I wonder what the average Reform volunteer who is going to be knocking on doors for the next few years will think about this. After all, if it is true you need a Muslim candidate to counter a Muslim candidate, does that mean for the foreseeable future it will be impossible for the political right to put up a white male heterosexual candidate? That's the point. We should be able to take our own side. We don't need to launder our argument through the mouth of immigrants and Muslims. And I'm sorry if this disrupts your dream to Care Bear Stare and Anglican revival among Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Sikhs, and whichever other foreign religion there are here. Jews have been here for a few hundred years. Of course, slightly different case, but still, it's not Christian. I'm sorry. That's just not acceptable, I'm afraid. We should, and we deserve, our own political representation, and Reform should be doing that. But its increasing number of diversity hires and Conservative defections don't allow it to do that. Jenrick might actually be an encouraging trend in the opposite, but he is still outnumbered among senior Reform members by Liberals and Muslim candidates. Douglas says, the majority of people in Britain are still white, half the population is still nominally male. When it comes to the proportion of heterosexuals, it's increasingly hard to tell, especially among Reform, but on balance they still seem to dominate. Around the edges of Reform and among some would-be voters, this is all becoming understandably vexing. The unwise will decide to dismiss their concerns, but you can't dismiss them forever. And this is the point that Reform made when Douglas made when he made his pro-Rupert article back during Rupert's defenestration. It represents a split between Reform and its base that will inevitably cause headaches if it goes unaddressed. And this did cause headaches because Reform sources were telling journalists that the morale in the party is very low in Wales, and they said too many Tories, none of them signed up to Tories too. And that is the feeling from all the Tory defectors. It got to the point where even June Slater, the arch-Reform defender, said, if this stupid man Zahawi cannot segregate the difference between the COVID vaccine and other established vaccines, he displays the arrogance and contempt he's always had, and she still insists that voting reform is the best course of action. But even she's admitted, well, you don't like everyone in a party. If June Slater is counter-signalling your defection, it should be a 5-alarm fire in HQ, and I think this explains why Nigel Farage was so keen to ease the anxieties today of Robert Jenrick's defection and further defections, and set the May deadline for defections and say, well, we're going to reject some of them that don't fit. And I think Nadim Zahawi should have been one of those that you rejected. So final roundup before I just super chat and go to dinner, because my poor wife has been at work all day, and she wants me to shut up. What are we looking at in the lay of the land? So Reform are going to win, as things stand. People are frustrated by that. I see some people throwing their weight behind Advance UK, and they are an embryonic entity, and I don't see... It's going to be very difficult for them to match Reform's momentum and match the money power nexus that is promoting Reform on things like GB News and Talk, even though Ben has returned to Talk. But at the moment, they don't have much star power, and that's not me discouraging the efforts of any party to Reform's right to try and encourage Reform to be more right-wing, or if Reform ever capsize, be able to take their place. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. But being realistic and not intending to counter-signal, as things stand, barring Farage being hit by a bus and Zia being denaturalized and deported, I don't think that anyone is going to replace Reform as the most likely party of government. That being said, though, there is space for another party to exist. It's not impossible a party surpasses Reform in the next few years. It's going to be difficult. And there is room to put pressure on Reform at the very least. Because YouGov ran a favourability poll, and they found that Nigel Farage is actually way more unfavourable on a personal level than his rival political leaders. It just so happens that those politicians' parties are politically toxic. Outside of the constituencies that are overwhelmingly ethnically English and have big gardens and vote Lib Dem because they're the luxury belief class. Like, even Kemi Badenoch was personally more favourable than Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage is a much more polarising individual. Whereas people have fewer strong opinions about Kemi Badenoch because she's a non-entity. But Reform itself is a kind of protest vote against the uniparty establishment. But if someone were to position themselves to the right of Farage with equal charisma, they could at least force Reform to do better. And there is also a window of opportunity to do this, because over in the States, there is frustration with Farage. There is some belief that the Trump administration have distanced themselves from Farage, as I mentioned earlier. This was reported in the Times the other day by Josh Glancy, saying, a source close to Trump, Trump has totally lost faith in Farage. He doesn't believe he's for real. This is partially because of Zia Youssef. It's partially because counter-signaling mass deportations. And it's partially because of the presence of Rupert Lowe in politics. And so it was interesting, there was a poll done today that said if there was a party led by Rupert Lowe, he would get 9%. There isn't a party led by Rupert Lowe. This is just from pure social media reputation alone. And the vote would, of course, be dispersed across multiple constituencies, and other than in Great Yarmouth, he's unlikely to win a seat yet. But it would be enough to eat into the Reform vote and nip at their heels from the right, being the only party now to have a viable chance of even doing so, because the Conservatives have now completely abandoned any prospect of being to Reform's right, and so force the issue. So if Rupert did decide to set up a party, it would be an eligible prospect to at least force Reform to be better by the next election. And even Nadim Zahawi seems to think so, because he said that Rupert Lowe is the rising star in Parliament shortly after the last election. So there's some accidental memetics here. And Rupert Lowe actually said in a post on X, the party politics has failed. It's failed Great Yarmouth. It's failed England. It's failed Britain. It's a circus, a pantomime, a show, with no care for what's really being inflicted on decent tax-paying men and women. They treat it like a sport. It's not. It's our country, our home, and our people. And this was the message from today for all the kerfuffles around Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch, and after the defection of Nadim Zahawi. And he's saying, the solution, a Reform dictatorship packing its ranks of the very same people who decimated the country over a dire 14 years. I think not. Nadine Dorries, Jake Berry, Lee Anderson, Nadim Zahawi, really? Are these the people to turn the country around? A Labour defector is on the way too. I mean, really? And then he even takes aim at Jenrick. He says, even Jenrick has to take full responsibility for what happened on his watch as immigration minister. Entire communities transformed into what now resembles the third world. Vast streets of foreigners, unable to speak English. Towns changed beyond recognition. This is what they did to our Britain. All of them. Today he betrayed his colleagues. That's his choice. I am of the view that nobody who has had any role in governments in the past should be allowed by the British people to serve again. The damage is too immense, too grave, possibly too irreversible. All those washed up former MPs who are weaponising the rightful anger of the British people to slink back into Parliament. It's sickening to watch. Please remember this. They did this to the country. These are the people who destroyed Britain. They will not fix it. Reform will not fix it. Farage was supposed to destroy the establishment, not join them. Quoting Obi-Wan Kenobi, how can you not like him? This is why he backed him for so long, and he says he was wrong to do so. Party politics is dead. We need an entirely different way of doing things. Hundreds of men and women from outside politics put forward for election, all of whom must have had nothing to do with how our country has been so abhorrently failed. I'm going to think long and hard over the next weekend about my next step. Britain doesn't need mere reform from the same arsonists who burnt it to the ground. A real alternative must be provided. I will do that. And in another post, he suggested it will be mobilised by the next election. How fascinating. Now, what could Rupert do? So, I might go through this another time, because this stream has been far too long as it is. But Curtis Yarvin put out a piece on the current state of American politics and how the Trump administration has lost the Rubicon energy it had after winning the election and sprinting in the first 100 days with executive orders and the attempt to get appointments off the line. The appointments got held up. Congress has been complacent. The death of Charlie Kirk was not an opportunity that was sufficiently capitalized on to roll up the international NGO and Antifa political assassination industrial complex. Mass deportations are not done to nearly the scale that they had hoped. America's got net emigration for the first time for ages, actually. I think since records began. But the number of mass deportations themselves being held up by the courts, the incompetent people in the administration like Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, Kristi Noem to an extent, they've just been albatrosses around the necks of the administration's ability to get things done. And so Curtis proposes a different solution. He proposes what he calls a real political party, the Hard Party, designed to take unconditional control of the state, in which members delegate 100% of their political energy to the party's command. Joining a Hard Party is a political marriage, not an election night hookup with any random politician whose name on a lawn sign catches your eye. It's a legal private organisation whose goal is to become the ruling party of the next government. Its voters will elect this government, its officers will staff it, its donors will host state dinners, its ideas will become the official ideology, the official truth. They had better actually be true. This is what Reform started to be. Remember, Reform was a private company. Nigel Farage owned 2/3 of the shareholding. It wasn't democratic. It's still not democratic. He has final say over almost all of the appointments. He has final say over policy. He runs everything. The failure of the Hard Party was that you don't have a sufficiently strong man to lead it. And what I mean by this is Nigel Farage is still afraid of being called racist. He is still susceptible to the opinions of others. He wants mainstream acceptance, as Rupert rightly understood. And he is actually a true liberal moderate. He is a man of the city. He's a trader. He doesn't pay much attention to culture. He's never been too opposed to Islam. And even if he is against mass demographic replacement, he is too worried about optics to say so. And the people around him, on message, you have varying degrees of radicalism, opportunism, and now you've got factional infighting. So Reform is not the Hard Party as promised. However, what's very interesting is Curtis Yarvin provided the insight here because he is a denizen of Silicon Valley, that the Hard Party of the future will use apps to liaise with its base and give them the impression that they're participating in democracy by voting, but it's a Potemkin vote because the policies and the personnel put forward by the Hard Party that are actually just made with good calls, so they're always amenable to the base. They're made with good instincts, they're made with authority, with the legitimacy of proper leadership. They're always in a carefully controlled democratic environment within the party itself, so people feel like they're participating, but actually they're just pressing a button on an app. So they get their dopamine hit, they fulfill the tribal and combative thrill of politics, of feeling like your guys are winning and getting one over on the other guys, when actually the policies have been curated by the party apparatchiks, and they have been done in the interest of the people, but they haven't been sourced from the masses. They don't fall afoul of the populist delusion. And inadvertently, Curtis Yarvin's describing Restore Britain. Right? Like, the policies are put to the membership vote on it, the membership always vote overwhelmingly in favour of the policies, because the policies are put to the membership who have joined because they already agree with Rupert. They believe that Rupert is the guy. They're happy with pretty much all of the staffing appointments made by Restore Britain because Restore makes sound staffing appointments. And so Restore is just like the hard party in waiting. And that hard party can provide pressure on Reform, even if Reform becomes the soft party of the next government. And also, it could be a good contingency for if Reform fail to live up to their mandate after 2029 and prevent the National Populist Project from capsizing if Reform don't succeed. Anyway, could be that, or as Curtis responded to me, we won't need politicians where we're going. So, thank you, Doomer Doc Brown. With that, I will just address your super chats. Thank you for sending them in, and then I will call it quits. I've kept my wife waiting long enough, but thank you for sending those in. From Michael Hassler for $5, thank you very much. Recommend reading the political philosopher known as Ivan Ilyin. He's up there with the likes of Thomas Carlyle and Oswald Spengler. Okay, I shall give that a look and add that to my increasing reading list. I'll be doing a video on the philosophy of nationalism soon enough. So any recommendations? I've read Hazoni, Guinon, read Bernard Yak, and I'm going to throw some biblical stuff in there. So it'll be interesting. An overview of the history of nationalism, types of nationalism, how we should be framing our arguments, what the civic versus ethno-nationalism debate is about. People seem to have really enjoyed my video on liberalism, so something similar to that. So, let me know suggestions. Alex Roberts, for $20, thank you very much. I mean, this is what keeps the show going. Like, this is all I'm doing at the moment, by the way, guys. It's literally just the show. So, and, you know, hopefully this year we'll have a family to support, so I appreciate all of your help with that. Working on conversion to Catholicism, good man. The priest acknowledged my concerns about an immoral world. You should look to do some work on what Britain should look like once liberalism is extinct. Okay. Sure, I'll take that on board. But all the best with your RCIA course. If you want to read some seriously good theology, Catholic text, recommend Carl Schmitt's Roman Catholicism and the Political Form. It's very dense, but might help you unlock why the rituals and theology of Catholicism has political and representative significance, and how technology is demonology. From Hades Kronos for another Australian $20. Hi Connor, would you be interested or willing to attempt to debate Destiny? No. He's a bad faith actor, he's a total reprobate, he's ruined his son's life, his jaw moves like he's on drugs. Like, he is a living refutation of why if your life is filled with vice, but you just adhere to shitlib ideology, it turns out that it doesn't make you a good person or correct. So, nah, I'm not going to waste my time with that. Sorry. I only do, like, I'll do most debates, but only with good faith actors. And if I want to do, like, an interview or collaboration, I mean, number one, my channel's not really equipped for it because I don't know how to set it up, and I don't really do digital stuff. But if I want to do in-person interviews, it's because it has political importance. So, like, my chat with Rupert, for example. But Destiny, who cares? Like, he's irrelevant. What are your thoughts on the lazy laws the Australian government are trying to pass? I assume that's to do with the free speech censorship stuff. I need to look more into that. I have been thinking of covering it. I just haven't had the time. Sarah Rogers and the State Department have been keen on counter-signaling it. So that's encouraging. The Aussies, man, good luck over there. Because I've really grown to love Australia. I've got some friends out there now. And you guys... it would be tragic to see that great civilization full of really hardy, good-natured people go the way of the dodo, just because your politicians are so cowardly. Final one from Breaking Bad. Reform, corrupt from the inside. I mean, some figures certainly are. Restore/Advance. Well, Restore isn't a party, but it could be. Advance, still to be seen. It seems more like a populist movement at the moment than a party eligible for governance, but again, I'm not looking to counter-signal the earnest effort. Ben Habib is a very polite chap, always been very good to me, so we'll see what comes of it. But anyway, I hope this was a useful insight into the inner workings of reform and why all these defections have happened. It's a long lesson. If you need to clip it up into short bits and circulate it, you're more than welcome to. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I will be back on Saturday with another stream, mainly about feminism and how the great feminization and the ostracism of young white men has succeeded, based on a couple of really good recent Compact Mag articles that passed coverage by. Anyway, God bless, take care, have a good night, and goodbye.